Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in this particular video, we are going to discuss 100 React.js interview questions and answers with code example for beginners. Now this video is only for those who already have idea on React and Redux, and you can basically use this video for your revision purposes. Now before starting the questions, I want to talk about one of my friend's YouTube channel. So he recently started his YouTube channel. In his channel he basically sell a lot of things, so I'll quickly play a video, and in that particular video we will basically tell you the channel introduction and what are the things that you can basically gain advantage from his channel. So I will highly suggest all of you, please subscribe to his channel. I will leave the link in the description below. He's currently at almost 800 subscribers, so plan is to complete 1000 subscribers as quickly as possible. So I will highly suggest all of you that please subscribe and give him some support. So let's see that video, and after that we will be starting all the questions one by one. Let's get started and good luck.
Hello everyone, my name is Kapil Kumar Raghuvanshi. I'm working as a senior software engineer for Walmart India. Recently I've started creating tech content through my YouTube channel, which says Tech Among Kapil, and my channel is dedicated to programming, tech tutorials, tech interview preparation, and soon I'm going to build a dedicated playlist with core JavaScript concepts in Hindi. Also I'm going to create a blind lead code 75 programs, another playlist in Hindi. So please like, share and comment on my videos.
Okay, so we'll start with the first one. Definitely, what is React.js? Now here you first need to give the theory, because once you'll give the answer of this particular question, definitely you'll get some counter questions after this. So React is basically open source JavaScript library which is developed for building user interfaces, particularly single page application, right? So this will be the basic definition of what is React.js is. So React, the whole concept of React is based on creating reusable component UI, which is basically to create single page application, short for SPA. So this will be the main definition of React.js. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so question number 2, what are the major features of React? Now here you can basically mention the following points. Now try to keep each and every point simple and concise. The reason is because from each and every point of this you can get some counter questions. All right, so the first one is virtual DOM. So React basically uses a virtual DOM, right? So we have a original DOM and then we have a virtual DOM. So what basically does React basically uses some kind of diffing algorithm to see the differences between the original DOM and the virtual DOM. So here you can see that. So we are having React uses virtual DOM, which basically nothing but improve performance by minimizing direct DOM manipulation. So only whatever things that needs to be updated in our original DOM, so React will only basically update those things. Next, React uses JSX, which is nothing but JavaScript XML, which allows writing HTML in our React components. Third point, components. So React is basically a component based library, right? So we have different components which basically makes React more reusable. All right, so that means the UI is basically built using reusable components. Then we are having one-way data binding, very important. So in React, data flows in one direction, right? Now what are the advantages of this? So it basically makes the application easier to understand and debug. Now if you know some idea about the Angular basically uses two-way data binding. After this we have high performance, obviously because of this concept of virtual DOM. In React application you have the performance will be high, all right, because it basically does some effective re-rendering of the components. And last, again, unidirectional data flow, right? Data flows in a single direction, which provides better control over the entire applications. So these all the points you can mention that what are the major features, and also you can mention if your interviewer asks you this question like what are the main advantages of using React. So these, for that particular questions also you can also mention the following answer. This is done. Now let's move on to the next one. Now what is virtual DOM, right? So you can see that I given for each and every questions I've given the exact definition, so that these kind of definition you can basically explain to your interviewer. And after that, if your interviewer asks you some queries from that, you will be basically able to explain your interviewer by using some diagrams or obviously it's always better to give some example using some real life code example. So here virtual DOM is basically lightweight in-memory representation of the real DOM or the original DOM, right? What basically React does, it basically keeps a copy of the actual DOM structure in the memory that calls the virtual DOM, right? And again, we discussed in the previous slide what is the main advantage is that so React don't re-render all the components every time. It only updates whatever changes is there in your virtual DOM, so that part will be basically updated in your real DOM. So these all are the steps. So first we have the rendering of the components, then let's say if there are any update occurs by any user click or anything, so that will be your updating phase. Then as I already mentioned that React uses the diffing algorithm, right? So it basically checks what are the difference between the real DOM and the virtual DOM, and based on that it basically does some batch updates, right? And then at the end this is called the process of reconciliation. So after all of this, React basically updates whatever things that needs to be updated in your real DOM. So this is the concept of virtual DOM and how it works. Let's move on to the next one. Now what are the components in React? Very important question, and from this particular question there can be many counter questions that you might get. So first what you will basically explain that components are the building blocks of your React application. So whatever things that you will be creating, the UI, that is basically from the concept of components. So they're reusable pieces of UI that can be nested, managed and handled independently. And after this you will immediately tell your interviewer that we have two types of components in React. One is the class based component and one is the functional component, right? Now once you'll explain all of these, you immediately will get some kind of counter questions. Okay, now tell me about the class based component and give me a simple example, right? Something like that. Or tell me about the functional component or how you can create a functional component. So these two questions that we'll be seeing in the next two slides. So let's move on to the next one. Again, explain class components with example. Now from this one we will be learning very simple example, and what I will suggest all of you, for each and every question that I mentioned, try to do a hands-on coding. So from this diagram you can try to implement by your own. So first thing what you'll mention that okay, first we need to import React and the component from React. So class based components start with a class keyword, very important, right? Then you have the name of the component. Name of the component always start with caps, right? This is very important, which extends the component library from React. Now here what basically it does, we have this render method. So what this render method does, this basically render the JSX that needs to be rendered in your browser. So this render method basically returns the JSX, and this is nothing but your JSX which you will be seeing in your browser, right? So again I repeat again, so we have the class keyword, then the name of the component which extends the React component from React. Then we have a render method. So this render method will return the JSX that we want to see in our browser, and at the end we need to export this component so that we will be able to use it in our main app component. So this is how you need to create class based component. Now let's move on to the next one. Now very important, explain functional component. Now most of the times I can guarantee in your interview you will get, let's say 90% of the questions based on functional component, because functional components are used nowadays in all the application, and it's very important. So in your interview we will tell that. Now see, normally in interview two types of things happen, right? Either you have a like only theoretical interview where interviewer only ask you like tell me in theory, and then you have a hands-on coding interview. So here in that particular kind of interview, what your interviewer will tell that okay, tell me each and everything and give me proper example. Okay, now this depends from company to company, right? So now here when you explain what is functional components, so what you need to basically explain that okay, functional component we can create two ways. Either we can create or use normal function keyword, or we can create using ES6, right? So if we are using normal function keyword, so we need to take the function keyword and then the name of the component again. Now name of the component again start with the caps, right? And then because it's a function, it will simply return the JSX here directly, and this is much more simpler, right? Functional component will return the JSX directly. We don't have any render method or anything. Now similarly here in the, if this is arrow function, nothing but it's a simple ES6 arrow function, and which will nothing but will return the JSX that you are returning here. And at the end in both the places you need to export these components so that you will be able to use it in some other places. So this will be a proper example how you can create functional component, and try to give two example both, that we can create using function keyword or we can also use arrow functions, right? Let's move on to the next one. Now, what is JSX? So JSX stands for JavaScript XML, right? So what basically it does, so in normal application, how it will happen, so you write your HTML, then you have a CSS, and then you have a JS file where you will do all kind of interactivity. Your HTML only consists of your basic structure, CSS for styling, and then you have a JS, right? In your JSX, what you do, you write your HTML elements directly inside your JavaScript, so in JavaScript, and then you place them in the DOM with using methods, without using methods like create element. So what basically does, you can see this structure, so this React will do internally. So this also you need to explain in your interview, right, that how this is basically working. So this is not HTML, right, but still you are able to see the HTML in your browser, correct? So what will tell that JSX will allow us to write HTML element in JavaScript, but we don't have to use any methods like create element or append child. The reason is because React will internally do all of this. So here, let's see this example very carefully. So here what you are doing, right, you are simply returning a JSX. What React will do, React will use this create element. So it will basically tell that, okay, I need to create a h1 tag. So this will be your h1, and this is the content or the children, right? This can be nested also. So this is the nothing but your content. And null is because you don't have any attributes here. So for example, let's say you have a h1 and then you have some content here, right? So you have a content, so you have a class name here in this part, right? So if you add those attributes will come here. So the again I'll repeat the answer here. So you might get these questions very frequently because this is very important. So JSX stands for JavaScript XML, which allows us to write HTML elements in JavaScript and place them into DOM, and then React will basically use some create elements, some methods internally, which will convert this JSX into plain JavaScript. All right, now let's move on to the next one. All right, so next, how to export and import components. Now this is also very important. So here also either you can give the example like we can export a particular component using a default export or named export, right? So one thing is very important I want to mention is that is these all the concepts that we are discussing, most of them are actually from ES6 JavaScript. So it's very important, if you're giving React interview, you should definitely cover all the key concepts of ES6, right? So here you can see that I already have a component that I've created. So this is a functional component. So what we are doing, basically we are doing a default export. So that means what I'm trying to do, I'm exporting this component so that I will be able to use it wherever I require to use this particular component, right? So these kind of things you need to explain, that why export is required or why you need to export a component. So here in our app component or our root component, or this can be any component where you want to use this, you need to import this component and then you will be able to use it. So until unless you'll export this, you'll not be able to import it, right? So that is the reason whenever you want to reuse a component, you need to export that component. Either you can do export default or you can also do a named export. Let's move on to the next one. Now very important, how to use nested components. Now see, as I already told you that React is a basically library of concepts of components, right? So whatever things you'll be creating, let's say you're creating a layout, each and every part of this layout will be a component, right? And there can be some component which can be reusable in multiple pages. So for example, you can see that what we are doing, first we have nested component, like first I have a header component. So header is a common, right, for all the pages or all the layout that you will be creating in your application. So here what I'm doing, I'm using a component which is a menus component, right? Here I'll be rendering the menus. So that means this menu is now nested inside this header component. So what will happen, this menu will be now considered as the child of this component. So this header is now parent for these menus. Again, here what you are doing, again we are importing now the header component in our main app component, right? So if you see, right, this component is now sub child of this app component. So we have app component, there we have nested header component, then again this header component we are nesting the menus component. So this is how you need to do. One very interesting point I want to mention, whenever you will tell these things, let's say you want to use a nested component, right? If the components are in the same file. You notice here, right, we are in the same file. So in that case, you no need to export this component because you'll be able to use it directly. So this point also you can mention. But if any case you want to use this in other place, in that case you need to export this component so that you'll be able to import it. So this is how you can use nested components. Now let's move on to the next one. Now, one of the key interview questions, I'm pretty sure if you're giving beginner level of interview less than, let's say, less than 5 years also, most of the times you will get this question, and very, very important. And whenever you get what is state in React, you need to try to give this answer with a proper example, right? So first you need to give the answer. So what is a state, right? So let's say you're creating a React application. So state is nothing but a object that represents the part of the app, right, that can change. Example, we have a button, right, and then there is a counter value. Every time you click on this button, you need to increase the counter value from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, right? So that means there are some kind of things, the value is getting changed, and this updated value you need to render in your browser. So that means some place you need to store this value, right? So this value you will be storing where? You'll be storing in a state, right? And this is your component state. So let's see the definition, because it's very, very important to understand the definition also. So state is an object that represents the parts of the app that can change. Each component can have its own state. Very, very important. Key point, extremely important, which can be, that means state can be managed within the component. So let's say you are having a component and this component is having a state. That means this state you will be able to manage in that component only. You can't manage that state outside of this component, right? And when the state changes, what will do? React will re-renders the component to reflect the new state. So let's see how this works. So we'll see this example. Let's say you have some tree. So this is your DOM and this is your real DOM. Now, whenever this is, let's say, your virtual DOM, right? And this is your real DOM. So you have a button. Whenever you are changing the counter, let's say this part is changing from 1 to 2. So React, what it will do, React will basically compare these two things and it will see that, okay, there is a change in this particular place. So what it will do, it will only update this part here. And what will happen, because the state changes, so we need to re-render the component so that user will be able to now see from 1 to 2, right? So this will be a proper definition of state. Now let's see with the example. Now here, now when you will give the interview, you need to basically mention or basically ask your interviewer like what kind of state example that you want. Do you want me to give class-based example or functional example? So I will suggest that please try to give both. Like in your class-based component, what you need to do, first we have a counter class. This is your component, again, which extend the component library, and here inside constructor you need to initialize the state. So here you can see that this is the initializing of state. Because you're writing inside constructor, we need to take this dot state, and this is a object. So this is your object. Now to render this state, what we have done, this dot state dot count. So this is what exactly we have done. Similar things you can achieve. Let's say you don't want to take constructor, you can directly state in the body of the class, and this is actually how I like. So what you can do, remove the constructor, and then you no need to take this, because now this will basically refer to this class state, counter dot state. So now we will be able to again do the same thing. So this dot state dot count is nothing but 0, right? So this is how you need to do it in class-based component. For functional component, again, these points we are going to discuss in the later questions also, but this is just to give example. So for functional component, you need to use state from React, right? So what it will do, so here you need to take the state variable. So this is your state variable. Now if you see these both compare, this is your state variable here and this is your state variable here. This is the method which will update the state, and then you have to take the use state and you need to tell React what is your initial value. So 0 is your initial value and here it is 0, which is your initial value. If you compare both, the concept both are same, only how you are basically writing. So here it is much more simpler. Here it is little, you need to not complicated also, but you need to write more. So that is the reason people are basically using functional component nowadays, right? Now whenever you give this kind of answer, right, you will immediately get some kind of counter questions also. Something like, okay, now tell me how you can update the state using this set count. So you need to give those example. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, So now we already have, right? I already told you that you can have some immediate counter questions. So you, in the previous slide, if you notice, right, in the previous slide you mentioned like what is state, and in the next, okay, now your interviewer can ask you like, okay, tell, you already mentioned like what is state, now tell me how we can update the state so that the component will re-render and that updated value we will be able to see in our browser. So let's see how we're going to do that. Now again, you please try to keep both, right? That state in React is updated using SetState method in class component and using UST Hook in functional component, right? These two things please mention, and we are going to see the same example. So what we have done, again, we have initialized the state. So this is how you can do initialize, right? We have done initialize the state. Now we are rendering the state here. So this will be this.state.count, which will be 0 for the first time. Now we have a button on click. Now you might also think why I'm going little fast, because this video is only for those who already have idea on React, right? And this video is nothing but will give you the sum up, so that let's say you are having upcoming interview, so you will be able to finish all the concepts in very little time. And I'm pretty sure this is going to help you immensely, right? So that is the reason I'll not go into much details, but I'll tell you some overview from each and every concept, so that from your side now it's your task to complete all of this by your end. So try to write all of the code and try to basically implement instead of using an image. Or what I'm trying to say, if you're watching this video and you are seeing this kind of example, try to write this in your VS Code or something, the code editor that you are using. So again, so we are having this.state.count, which is 0 now. So as I already told you, that SetState method we need to use. So use this.setState, and you are basically telling that which variable I want to update. So on click of this button, I want to update the counter variable. So this is the reason we are doing this.state.count +1, and here in the on click, so this is the method. So here we are having this.increment. So we are basically telling that, okay, on click of this button, I need to update the state by 1. This is how you can do in class-based component. In functional component, again, you need to take or initialize the useState. So this is your state variable, this is the method, this is your useState, and this is your initial value. And here you need no need to take any this.count, you need to take only count. The reason, because you are not in the class, this is inside function. So count will render 0, and then in the function we have again handle click, which is nothing but increasing the count value by 1. So set count is count +1, nothing but it will become 2, 1, 2, 3, like that, right? So this will be the example how you can update state in both class and functional components. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, another very like, I'll not say very important, but sometime you'll get like, what is SetState Callback. So first see the definition. So SetState Callback method is actually, SetState method will accept a callback as a second argument, right? And which will execute it once the state has been updated. So for example, you have a button here and you're increasing the count value 0 to 1 to 3. So whenever you call the SetState method, every time the state is getting updated, this call in the callback, you will be able to access the updated state. So if you noticed here, right, we have an increment method. So having this.setState, which is count, is this.state.count +1. So that means from 0 to it will become 1. And then if you just log, so this is a callback. So here you have a callback. Inside this, if you just log this, right, you will be able to access this updated value. So here, if you log state updated, will become 1. Again, if you click the button, it will become 1 to 2. So here you'll be able to access the 2. So what is the purpose then using? So what you can do, right, let's say you're doing some kind of API call or something, and then you are doing some logic here, logic building you're doing, and whatever value you want to basically getting, that value you want to take inside your callback, and based on that you can do some kind of, let's say, API call or something. So that is the reason inside this callback you will be able to get the updated state. So this is what it is mentioned here, right? Now let's move on to the next one. Now this can be very important question. Now why you should not update your state directly, explain with example, right? So what will happen if you directly update your state, or this is called if you mutate your state directly, so it will not trigger a re-render of component. And I already told you, until unless you re-render, so React, what it does, it will, every time user do a certain action, React will re-render the UI, right, so that you'll be able to get the updated value, and it will leading to some inconsistencies in the UI. instead you should use SetState or state hooks, right? For class base you need to use SetState method. For functional you need to use the use state hooks. So if you see, right, I already mentioned, like increment, we are having these dot state dot count. Directly we are mutating the state. If you noticed, directly we are doing these dot state dot count plus 1, and this is the incorrect way. You should not do this. This will not re-render the component. What you can do, you can use a SetState method that we have discussed in the previous video. So this is also one of the, I think I also got this question 2-3 times while giving interview. Now let's move on to the next one. Now again, very key. Now this is also another key question that you will get. I can guarantee, like less than 5 years of experience, you will get these questions in your interview. What are props in React, or basically properties, right? So what is props? See, props are basically a way to communicate with components. This is a very simple example. Now you can give something like props are basically used to pass data and event handlers to the child components. First point, props ensure a one-way data flow. Remember, as I already told you, that React basically does one-way data flow. Until Angular it does two-way. So from parent to child. Now obviously you can also do child to parent. That is called state lifting. So that we are going to see later. Very important third point, prop cannot be modified by the child components that receive them. So props are read only. Okay, so let's see how we are going to do that. Now for this one, we have a parent component which is function app, and we have another component which is a child component. So what we are doing, we are importing or using this component here. You noticed? Now props is a property. Whenever you pass a property, this will receive here as a property, right? And this will be an object. Props will be an object. So now, because we are passing name as a prop, so this will be your key, prop key, and this will be your value of the prop. So now here, if you render hello props.name, so what will happen? It will render John once, and then it will render Jane one more time, because we are calling 2 times. So if whatever value will be passing, you will be able to get that value, right? So this will be your key, or basically prop key, or this is the prop value. All right, so this will be the very simple definition with example what are props. Now let's move on to the next one. Again, now I think till now we have learned what is state, what is props. Now very important, what is difference between state and props. Okay, now let's see. So first, as I already mentioned, like state is a built-in object used to store data that may change over life cycle of a component, and it is managed within the component itself, right? So each and every component can have its state. On the other side, props, which is short for properties, are used to pass data from parent to child component, right? So to communicate between 2 components. As I already mentioned, that props are read only. You cannot basically modify it. State is mutable, right? We can basically change it using SetState method in class components and using useState hooks in functional component that we have discussed in the previous. Props are immutable, right? Once passed to a child component, they cannot be modified by the child. So for example, there is one component, and in that component you have a state which you are managing, and then there is another component. This state value are passing to this child component, right? So you are only passing the value here, which is read only. You cannot change the value in the child component. If your state changes in the parent component, then only the child value will change. So that is the reason it is mentioned that props cannot be modified by the child component. State is local to component, right? Cannot be accessed or modified by child components. Props are passed from parent to child component and can be accessed by the child. So these, I will say that first 2 points are very important. If you're able to explain these 2, it is more than enough, right? So that's all for this particular question. Now let's move on to the next one. Now as I already told you, like React is basically do one way, right? So you have 1 component, 2 component, 3 component. You will be able to pass data from this to this component, and again from this to this, like that, right? So then what is lifting up in React? And this is also very important. So lifting state up is a pattern basically where state is moved to the closest common ancestor, or basically the child that needed to share the state, right? So what basically is mean by that? For example, I'll give you a very simple one. So you have 1 component, okay? Now in this component, this is your parent, and you have another component which is your child, right? This is parent and this is child. What you need to do, right, in this child component you have a button. Okay, now what you need to do basically, instead of, so what you are doing, instead of managing the state in this child component, you want to manage the state from parent component, but your button is in child component, right? So somehow you need to basically tell that parent component, okay, whenever I'll click on this button, update the state that I'm managing in the parent. So in that case, what you can do basically, you can pass the state to the nearest closest common ancestor, right? So I think this will be a little tricky. Sorry, let's see with the example. So here you can see that we have a app component, and app component we are using a child component which is a parent, and in this child component we are passing two prop. One is the count value and one that is a method. Very important, right? Now you can see these two we are receiving as a prop here, and you have button in this component. So that means on click you are managing the state in this component. If you notice, see this one, you're clicking button in this child component, but you are updating the state in the parent component, right? Very important, right? And now what will happen, also you have initialized the state in this parent component also, but you are rendering the state in the unique child component. That is fine, but here if you notice, you're clicking button here, but you're updating the state in this component. So this is what exactly you are doing. So this is somehow you are doing like, okay, from child component I am basically managing my user activity, but state I'm managing in my parent component, and this is a very good way of basically managing some of the state, correct? Now how this is helpful? Again, single source of truth, right? Because if you're managing state in a parent component, you ensure the state is consistent across multiple child components. For example, this handle increment, you have some 10 more components here, and for each and every component you need to render the same thing. Now instead of managing the state in this component, each and every child component, what you are doing, you are managing the state in a single parent component, and then you are basically lifting that state up to each and every child component, right? Also obviously this will simplify the state management, right? Because the state logic is centralized, which is making it easier to maintain and debug. So this is also a very important question. Now I will say like this will not get in the very beginner level, let's say less than 2 years or less than 1 year, but more than 2 years you can basically get this kind of question in your interview. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Now what is children prop in React? So children prop is a special property in React that used to pass content that is nested inside a component. So what exactly is that? So you see here we have a child component and we have a parent component which is app component, and here what we are doing, we are importing this component and we are passing a children. So inside this component you have a children, right? And here also you have a children. Now what you can do, whenever you will be passing something inside this component or that is nested inside a component, here you will be able to render this component in your child component using prop.children. So whenever you do prop.children, React will basically check whatever is there inside this or nested inside these two container or basically your component. So for example, for the first one it will render a paragraph, for the second one it will render a h2 along with a button, right? Let's say for some other you are passing a h1, then you are passing a button, then you are passing a span, then you are passing a p, so it will render all four. So whatever simple, so you will tell in like it's a children prop is a special property. So whenever we will pass a content that is nested inside a component, so this is a component, right? So that content you will be able to access using props.children property. So that's all for this one. So now let's move on to the next one. Now what are default props in React? So default props is to set the default values for your props. So how you can do that? For example, very simple one. So you have a component which is receiving props and it is receiving a props.name. See this one very carefully. So what you can do, right, you can basically specify here clearly that okay, greeting, which is the name of your component, dot default props, right? This will be default props, name is guest. So what will happen, for example, you have a app component, right? And inside this app component you are calling this greeting component. But what you are doing normally, what you do, so what you have learned, like if you are passing a prop, you need to pass this prop. Okay, I'll pass name. Sorry. So normally we'll pass name and then we'll pass some value, right? So we'll pass a name and then there will be a value. But in case if you noticed here, right, we are not passing any prop. So if you don't pass any prop, but in that component you specify the default prop, so even if we don't pass anything, it will render hello guest. The reason is because in the default prop, the value of the name is guest. If I pass here instead of guest, I'll pass Sangam, so it will render here hello Sangam, because even if I don't pass any prop from this component, it will take the default one, right? So this is how you can specify default props. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, what are fragments in React and its advantages? Now again, it's very simple. Like, fragments are basically allowed to group multiple elements, and the advantage is that it basically doesn't allow to add an extra node to the DOM. So normally, let's say in React we cannot use multiple elements like this. We need to wrap all of these elements inside one parent element, right? You can't basically, there should be always one parent element in JSX. So now let's say you want to wrap these your elements, let's say li1 and li2 inside a paragraph or UL. If you don't do that, right, or if you do this, if you take UL here, so what will happen? This is nothing but a HTML element, right? So this will add an extra UL in your DOM. But if you are using fragment basically doesn't add that one, doesn't add any extra node in your DOM. So you can either import it from React using react.fragment, or you can also use something like this. So this is sort syntax. Okay, so this is all about the fragment. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, so now next, how you can do styling in React.js, right? Now to answer this one, now this question can be very vast. If you're in very beginner level, so you can basically mention like we can use different kind of styling, like let's say inline styles, CSS style sheets, CSS modules, some libraries like Material UI, then you have some other Tailwind CSS, ADC and UI, so many other things, right? And then once you tell this to interviewer, then see what your interviewer is basically countering, right? So they can ask you like, okay, tell me something about inline styles, or tell me, or write a very simple CSS style sheets and use that in a component, or create a very simple CSS modules, something like that. Don't try to write all of this same time, because there can be a lot of counter questions on top of it. So if they're asking, okay, tell me how we can do styling, then just first mention like we can use some different techniques like inline style, CSS style sheets, CSS NGS libraries like style components, Material UI, Tailwind CSS, and design, so many other things. If they are telling, okay, now tell me what is inline style, so you can tell like, okay, each and every HTML element that we'll be writing, in that element we can basically specify specific style property, which will be nothing but a JavaScript style object, right? And inside this object we can basically use all the CSS properties that we can think of. So this is one way of writing inline styles. Now the reason this is called inline styles, because you are writing inline for each and every element. Next, how you can write CSS style sheets. So to create a CSS style sheets or CSS modules, the approach is same. There will be slight differences. So for example, if you're creating normal CSS style sheets, so create a separate file like style.css, right? And then you write all of your style in that file, correct? So this will be a normal how you write your CSS code. And then once you do that, you need to import that file, and then you'll be able to use using class name. Now here again, one more thing I want to mention, when they will ask you like how to use styling, please mention like in React we need to use class name instead of class, right? This is very important, and this is also another interview question, like why we need to use class name instead of class. And the reason is because if you remember, we have a class based component where we have a reserved keyword class, right? We have class and then the name of the component, something like that. So that both will not conflict, right? So they have they are basically telling to use class name instead of using a class. And then once you do class name, in that class name you need to mention the class name that you are using in your style. But how the CSS module will work, so the only difference will be the name of the file. So first you need to basically use here styles dot module dot css, right? So this will be dot module, this will be the extension, file extension. Then you'll write the same style here, and to use that, what you need to do, right, you need to use import styles. So this will be object. So style.modules.css will give you object of the CSS that you are writing, right, from style.module.css. And then to use that, what you need to do inside in this class name, you need to take a bracket, and then you need to do style dot the name of the class. So this will be style dot container. Let's say you have another one which will be style dot that class name. So the only difference will be, again I'll repeat, for normal CSS you need to use style.css, import it, and then directly use by the class name. For module you need to basically use style.module as the extension .css. You need to import as an object, so you need to import styles from style.module.css, and then you need to use it using style.container, style dot that class name, something like that. Okay, so I think if you answer all three, inline style, CSS styles, sheets, and CSS modules, I think this will be more than enough, because in interview they will not go into much like, okay, now tell me some other things like material UI, how you can use tailwind CSS and those things. For a basic perspective, this is more than fine. Now let's move on to the next one. Again, this is also very important, like how you can conditionally render components in React. And this is also again, this is a ES6 concept, right? So if your interviewer will ask you what is conditional statements or how you can conditionally render components, both are actually same. And here I'll give you both the example how you can do that. So we can use if, right? So if this, do this, else do that. Or you can use ternary, or you can also use the and. This all you can use, correct? So let's see. So first you can see that I have a component which is a greeting component, and here I'm passing two prop. So one is logged in and one is flag. So what I'm doing here, I can see we are using if, right? I will tell you all the uses. So you're checking if is logged in, return this JSX, else it will go here, and then we are doing ternary. So you are checking if flag is true, render please sign up. If flag is false, render please sign in, right? So this is what you can do. And if you want to use and, what you can do like, okay, condition, if this is true and then render this, render h1, right? So this will be and. So for and you no need to take a colon, right, because there is no else block for this. So if this is true, render this. For ternary you need to check if this is true, render this, or else render that. And also you can use if, but I'll suggest try to use ternary more. And also if you're doing some kind of map and those things, you should not use this and operator, right? Try to use ternary. So if this or else, if you no need to render anything, simply render null, simple as that. Okay, so if you get these questions in your interview, please explain that we can use operators like if we can use, and we can use, and also ternary we can use. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, now another very important, now these questions I'm pretty sure you will get hands-on, right? Hands-on, I mean like if they'll ask you, okay, tell me how to render list of data in React, what they can do, right? They will give you some data, 1 2 3, something like that, and they will tell you, okay, now render all of this in your UI. This is the same thing. What I'm trying to say, that whatever questions I choose here, right, from a beginner to intermediate point of view, these questions can be framed in a different way. It's your idea that whether you are able to basically catch it or not. For example, how to render list of data in React is similar to, let's say if they give you some data, you need to render it, both answer will be same. I hope you're getting, right? So what you can do, right, you first tell that, okay, we can use the map function of ES6 to iterate over array and render each and every item, because map will do like that. And then you can do a very simple example like create a component and pass some data as a prop. So we are passing 1 2 3 4 5, right, as a prop, and this data we will be receiving as a prop here. And then we are simply doing map, and this number is nothing but each and every individual number, and then we are taking a li and simply rendering a number, all the number, right? If this is an object, then simply render the object properties. So as simple as that. If they will ask you, okay, tell me how to render list of data, simply tell them, okay, we can use map function to iterate over that particular array or whatever data you will be providing me, and based on that I'll be able to render it. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Now, very important, this also I will suggest, this is an important question. So, okay, so you will basically get this, like what is a KeyProp. So what is a KeyProp and what is the uses, why React use this? So KeyProp is a unique identifier, okay, each element in a list. So again I mentioned, right, you will get 1 2 3. So each and every element is a unique element, and what React does using this KeyProp, they will keep a track of this each and every element, so that if there is any changes in the DOM, then these all the keys will change, right? So they will be able to track it. Now what they will do, that simply like in the definition also, that which items have changed, which items are added, or which is removed, correct? So how you can do, again we are using map, and then we are simply using a key prop, and then we are doing number.toString. So each and every number we are keeping as a key. Here you will also get index, but I'll give you the next questions also is basically related to index, so that is the reason I haven't used this, although it is absolutely fine to use indexes as keys, but try to avoid not using indexes. Try to give some unique identifier, something like this, okay? So this is what key prop is. Now let's move on to the next one. See, very important, why indexes are for keys are not recommended. So why you should not use keys indexes as key. So the reason is very simple, I'll tell you why. So first see the definition, that use indexes as keys can lead to performance improvements and unexpected behavior. When list items are recorded or removed, it should be unique and stable. Now see the reason. Okay, now see, I have some elements, right? I have a John, my name, not my name, I have a John, and then I have a Sam, and I have my name here. For each and every, let's say you are using the indexes as keys. So for index start from 0, right? It will be 0, it will be 1, and for this will be 2. Okay, now what will happen, let's say you have a button, okay, and every time you click a button you will add a new user. So I'll click a button, so the requirement is that first time when you will be clicking, you need to add at the end. Second time when you will click, you need to add at the first. So first time, let's say I'll click on this button, so I'll add one more, let's say JJ, and this will become 3. Now for this part, this is fine. If you notice, the reason is because you're using indexes as keys, right? So it will be 0 1 2 3, and these all 3 will be untouched. So React will not re-render these 3 lists. Very important, right? Because these are all the keys haven't changed. What will happen next time, whenever I'll click, I need to add an item here. So I'll add GG, okay, something. Now the trick comes. So now you added at the first, so now this will become 0, this will become, so 0 will become 1, right? This Sam will become 1 to 2, and Sangam will become 2 to 3. See what will happen, all the keys will change. Now although you haven't changed anything in this 3 item, React needs to re-render all the list. I hope you're getting right, because whenever you add here, these keys is now 0 and all the other keys will change. So that means React will re-render the whole list. That is the reason you should not use, try to avoid using indexes as keys. Try to use some unique properties like ID you can use, or you can also merge both ID and index, concatenate, right? Both you can do something like that. So this is the main idea. Whenever you have a very large list, what will happen, you are using indexes, so every time list will change and React will re-render, right? So that's all for this particular one. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, how to handle buttons in React. By now I think you'll be able to do it because you already have seen some example. So first thing what you'll do right now, to basically tell these kind of things in your interview, try to give with an example. Create a very simple one. Let's say you have a button, take a on-click method, so you need to specify, okay, I need to take an on-click method or event handler in my button, so that every time I'll click on this button I need to increase the count, and then you need to take the function, and then you'll just update the count by 1. So this is, I'm giving this this kind of example. The reason, because in interview you'll not get like, okay, now convert this one to TypeScript, do this functionality. If very less time, let's say less than 30 minutes for theory and then other 30 minutes for hands-on coding, then they will not ask you to lot of things. So they will first check whether you know all of these things or not, and to answer those things, these things are more than enough. Okay, so this is one thing. For class-based component, exact same. The only difference is that you need to take the these keyword. The reason is because you are inside a class, you need to specify, like, or basically tell that, okay, I'm now checking the instance of this method, so you need to take that these dot handle increment. These dot handle increment nothing but counter dot handle increment, because you are inside this class, right? So this is how you can handle buttons in React. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, how to handle inputs in React again. So there are two kind of things we can do in React, right? So we have controls components, and then we have uncontrolled. These also we are going to see later, but try to give like with a very simple one, like okay, you will tell like we can use some control components where form data will be handled by component state. So what we need to do, we need to take a state, we need to take an input, we need to take a form or button something, and then we need to store this input value in some state, and every time user will type something, I need to change the state. So this is what exactly we have done. So we have a function component, functional component, we have a name state, set name which will update the state, and then we have used state method and the initial value. Now inside input we have a type, we have a value, we also can take a name, we also can take a placeholder, that is fine. Now very important, you need to specify, because the question is related to handle inputs. So you need to tell like I need to keep a track of this name variable every time user will change, right? So that means we need to take a on change, and in the on change we'll take the handle change event. So what this will do, this will give you event property, and here you can basically store the event.target.value, which is nothing but whatever user is typing in your input, right? So this is how you can store it. Now once you store it, now you will be able to manage it. Let's say you need to pass this in your API. Those are different things. Try to keep your interview questions very concise. If they will ask you how to handle inputs, give them like tell them like this. So in React we can manage inputs in two ways. We can create controls component, which is basically handled by the component state, or we can also create uncontrolled component that we are going to see later. To manage using control components, we will take a state. This state will basically nothing but will store the current value that user will be typing. Then we can take a on change method, and then we can set the value in that particular method. Okay, so that's all for this particular one. Now let's move on to the next one. Now very important. Okay, although you are not using any class-based component in your project, or if you join that company, you will see that we are not using any class-based component, but still it's very important to learn all the lifecycle methods in React, right? And I actually keep this one very simple. The reason is there are a lot more, but in your React interview we need to basically give the most important one, right? So we have three things in React. Whenever from start to end, component first time getting mounted, so whatever you are seeing in your browser, then component will be getting updated. So for example, you are clicking a button and you are increasing a count value, so it is in updating phase. And then you are in the unmounting, when the component will be basically being removed from the DOM, correct? So these three will be the things that you need to mention. Very important. Try to give like this only. Mounting, when the component is being inserted into the DOM. When updating means again when the component state or the prop change, and unmounting is when the component is being removed from the DOM. Okay, now see, I'll create a very simple class-based component and I have all the three. So then they will ask you, okay, now tell me what are the methods for each and every state that you mentioned just now. Then you will tell, okay, for mounting we can use component.mount. So if we do something inside this will only render one time when component will mount. Okay, then we have updating means component did update. So here what you can do, you will tell like this only in your interview. This component did update will give us previous props and previous state, and now we can basically check with the previous prop and the current prop will be this dot prop. Similarly, we can check previous state and this dot state. So if previous prop and the current prop there is a change in changes, means component is updated. If there is a change from the previous state and the current state, that means there is a component state changes, something like that. So this is for updating. And then simply for mounting we can use unmount, not mounting, sorry. For unmount we can use component will unmount, where you can do some kind of like side effects, not side effects, like some kind of cleanup things that you can do inside component will unmount. So these three are the very important. Then we have some render method, constructor, but those things is fine. For beginner level these three will be more than enough: mounting, updating and unmounting. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, now we are already in the most popular section of this video, Because the reason why I'm mentioning each and every company that you will be giving interview for, they use functional component, right? And for functional components are based on hooks. So you will get 100% you will get questions from hooks. There is no way for beginner level you will get. That is the reason first question I have given, I also got this when I started my React journey, that tell me what are the popular hooks that we have in React, explain its uses. I'm telling about my journey means first time when I started, that time functional components was not there, so I used class-based component and then they introduced the functional components, right? So to answer this one, simple, keep this one very simple, that mention all the hooks and then give one-liner answer like what each and every hooks does. So start with very popular use state. You will tell manage a state in functional component, as simple as that. Use effect manages side effects in functional component. The reason why I'm telling, because they ask you what are the popular hooks. Now you will tell use effect and then you explaining all of this with example, then your interviewer might get irritated also. So first keep all this on concise, and then after this definitely you will get counter example. You will tell use effect and then they will ask, okay, now give me one example on use effect, or give me one example on use effect, use state, something like that. So use effect manages side effect in functional component. Use context, consume context in functional components, or basically use to manage global state. Use reducer, same thing, manages state functional component, but it uses a reducer function and it is for more complex state management. Then we have use ref, which access the DOM elements or manipulate DOM elements. Use callback for performance improvement use case. Use memo also for performance improvement use case, as simple as that. So these all are the main popular hooks that we can use, right? Now let's move on to the next one. Our next couple of will be based on these hooks only, right? Okay, I think this we have already done multiple times, still I'm going to again repeat. What is use state, how to manage it, or how you can use it, or give with one example. All of these questions you can give something like this. What we can do, first you need to explain what is a use state. So you'll tell, okay, use state is basically used to manage component state in React components. Okay, now tell me one example. So every time you give counter, you can give some different example also, that is fine. So you'll tell that, okay, first we need to import use state from React. That is the very important. So use state will take an initial value. So this is your initial value, right? So this will be your initial value. This can be anything. It can be string, it can be number, it can be boolean, it can be object, it can be null, it can be array, anything. Then we have a variable, which is your state variable, and you have a set state method. Then they will ask, okay, now tell me what exactly these two. So you tell, okay, variable, this is nothing but the state variable that will be displaying in our browser, or our user will be able to see that what exactly we are doing. Let's say we are doing some activity or something. Set state method is nothing but will update this variable state, right? And then you can give example, okay, I have a on click and I have a method here. This method is nothing but we are calling the set state dispatch method, which is updating the state by 1. So every time we'll click on this button changes, and the count value changes, and count value changes means the component state is getting changed or getting updated. This is exactly how you need to explain. So first give the theory perspective and then try to write with a very simple example. Sometimes they will not ask you, I'll tell you one very interesting thing. Sometimes interviewer will not ask you to write example. You need to tell them, okay, can I please give one example, because for me it will be very easy to explain using example, because I am pretty sure you also know that some questions can be very difficult to explain using theory. Those kind of questions, it will be always better to write example instead of telling a long theory, right? So keep this one very simple and then say by yourself, okay, now I'll write a very simple example to explain the uses of use state, something like that. All right, so this is all for this one. Please write all of this in your code editor and try to implement by your own. I'm pretty sure this will give you very advantage in React interview, because you will get these kind of questions only. Now let's move on to the next one. Now extremely important, or also very important, right? What is use effect hook and how to manage side effects? So first thing, again, you need to tell that what exactly is that. So you tell use effect is a hook that manages side effects. Like we can do so many things like data fetching. We can basically check our previous state, current state. We can do some kind of subscription, or some manual changing in our DOM element, those all of these, right? So how it works? So first you need to again tell, okay, first we need to import use effect from React. Now use effect will take a callback function, so this is the callback function, and a dependency array, right? Very important, dependency array. So then you need to explain your interviewer each and everything, that what exactly this dependency array, and based on these how this use effect will run. So first point you will tell, okay, if there is no dependency, means empty array, this effect will run only once on page load. So this is similar to component did mount in class components. Okay, if there is a dependency, I noted here, this use effect will run if the dependency value changes. So here if it's a dependency, if this value change, this use effect will run. Last, use effect will also return a callback function, which is nothing but a cleanup method, right? Now this is similar to component will unmount in class component, and this dependency is similar to what component did update in class component, right? Because this is nothing but you will be able to see here whether the prop or state are getting changed, and based on that this use effect will run, right? So this is what will be your example, what is use effect to, and how to manage side effect using it. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so now we have another very important one. So how to implement data fetching in React.js. Now obviously this you are mostly going to get hands-on interview questions, so they will tell you to implement. So they can give you a simple API endpoint, right? And you need to basically fetch the list of data. Now both the next two questions will be interconnected. So first thing what you need to tell, okay, first I will take a data where I'll be keeping my data or state, and use state of null, or you can also take this one as an empty array. Now as you already discussed that we need to take a use effect and we need to keep as an empty dependency. I already written that empty array means this effect will run only once, because we need to do it on page load. Now again, one more thing, you need to ask your interviewer that how you want this functionality. You want the data fetching on page load, or you want it on button click. If they want it on button click, so you need to, instead of calling in use effect, you need to do this on click on button, and we need to do the same things. I hope you are getting. So here let's say they will tell you, okay, now do it for page load. So you need to take a use effect, and then we need to create a method. So this method will be a simple async method, wherein the response will be using our fetch API. This will be an API endpoint that your interviewer will give you. Once you'll get the data back, you need to render or save the data in your SetState method, set data, right? And then once you get the data, you can render the data here, or else you can render some kind of loading. So obviously this part we are going to discuss, but this is how you need to implement data fetching, right? Now what you can do, right, take a dummy API endpoint from Google and try to implement the same thing in your VS Code, and also see how much time you are basically taking to implement this, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, how much, and based on that try to improve. See, this is how I also tried, because I failed so many interviews, where after giving multiple interviews, specifically hands-on interview, then only I'll be able to I was able to master all of this. Okay, now let's move on to the next one. Now, as I already mentioned that how to manage loading state, this is interconnected to previous one. So what is basically happens whenever you will do some kind of data fetching, right? So we have some kind of loading state, so that until unless the data is getting fetched from a API endpoint, we need to show some kind of loading data or loading state in our UX, so that it will be easy for our user to understand the data is getting fetched. We need to wait for some time. So what you can do, simply take a loading state, one more state, and keep this one as false, true, whatever. Now what we have done, simply the previous part we have done this async function, right? Before, very important, before you are calling the API, just keep this set loading as true. This is the first thing, and once you'll get the data back from your API, make this one as false again. So this is what exactly you need to do. That means the data is getting fetched, so loading will be true, and if the loading is true, you are showing that please wait, loading data, please wait. You are returning here, right? And then once you'll get the data, you're making this on false, so that time this part will be getting rendered. So this is how you can implement loading state in your API call. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, extremely important. This is also I'm saying important in everyone, because this is how I actually choose all of these questions, because these kind of things you will get in your interview. what is prop drilling or how to avoid it. Now please note it down, you will not get the exact question in your interview also. This question can be framed in many different ways, but whatever things they will ask, the answer will be almost same. First, the definition: prop drilling occurs when you pass data through many layers of components, and it can be avoided using context API or state management libraries like React. Now the question can be something like this: what is context API and why we actually need context API? In that case, you need to tell, okay, context API is basically used to avoid the concept of prop drilling. So what exactly prop drilling is? So you have a component, right? A component, component A. Then you have another component, B component, component B. You have another component, C component, and another component, D component. In this D component, you need to render something. So render title. But this title, you need to get it from A component, right? So what you need to do, and the path is A component in the B component is nested in A, C component is nested in B, and D component is nested in D. So there is no direct connection between A and D, right? So how you are going to pass it? So this is called the concept of prop drilling. So first you need to pass this title from A to B. See here I passed A to B. Then from B to C, same title I am passing. Then I'm passing from C to D again as a prop, and then in the D I'm rendering this. So this is called the concept of prop drilling. So you're passing like this from one component to another component. For now, for God's sake, this is only 4. What will happen? You have 40 components. You will do the same thing 40 times, right? It is irritating. You can't do, there is no other way. So that is the reason we have something like context API, but this is the reason why we need all of this. So when you are passing your data in many layers of components, so in that case you can basically use or avoid prop drilling using context API or some libraries like Redux. Now let's move on to the next one. Now next one is, what is context API in React and why is it used? Again, context API is way to share values, data or function between components without having to pass prop in every level, just like we have done in the previous one, right? So it is used to avoid prop drilling. So how this works, don't see this one, I'll tell you one very simple example. Let's say you are having some component, A component, B component, C component, and D component. So what we'll do, right, context will keep your all state in one place. So this is your context. What you can do, whenever it is required, so both the components, let's say, are not connected with each other. So now in that case there is no like disadvantages or no problem, right? What you can do, you can simply get your state from this context instead of passing it in every level, right? So this is what is, so you have a global state managing in one place, and then you are basically using this in all the components wherever it is required. Now the thing is, there are some process that you need to basically follow to create or manage a context. First thing, create a context. So you need to mention all of this in your interview, that to create a context we need to use create context. Okay, so create context will take an initial value, that also you can pass. Once you create a context, you need to provide this context. So you need to create a provider. What this provider does, right, this provider is basically give a value property which will be your state. So state property. So how you can do, so this provider will take a children. Now what this children is, again, this children is nothing but all of these components, child components, right? This children is that. So what you are doing, you're providing this value or the state in all the children. So that is the reason you'll be able to get it. And then at the end, in your root component, not in app, or basically in your root component in your application, you need to wrap this my provider or basically this provider, so that this context is now accessible in your application. If you don't do that, there is no direct connection between your context and the components, right? So that is the reason you need to wrap it. So we have 3 steps. We need to create the context, we need to provide the context, and then we need to wrap this context in our root component. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so now next one, how do you consume context using use context hook, right? So whenever you will be creating the context, so context will basically provide the state, and from the components you need to somehow consume that state. So the answer will be that we basically consume the context in functional component using use context hook, right? So this allows to access the context values directly, and it very simple. So what we need to do, right, in the previous example we learned that we need to basically provide our context, right? We need to provide the context. So once you provide the context, we need to first import use context from React, right? And then you need to basically import the context that you have created. So if I go to the previous slide, right, you can see here we have a my context that we have created. So here you need to basically first export this. So once you'll export this my context, this context will consume all the state variables that you already created, and then first we'll import this my context, and in this use context we'll basically receive a context object, and here you need to pass this my context that you have created, and this will give you the value. So inside this value you will be able to access all the state that you are having, right? And whatever value you want to render, you will be able to do that. So this is how you need to basically consume context using use context hook. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, how can you update context values? Now this is also almost similar process. The only steps will be, first you need to explain like this, like okay, first I'll create the context. So this is my context using create context. Then I created my provider. So my provider will receive the children properties, and I used my provider my context.provider, and here we are passing all the values, and this we have already discussed in the previous two slides. Now once you pass all of these value, now let's say in this component you need to consume this state, right? So in the previous slide we understood that okay, now use context you need to use, and then my context, the context name we need to pass here. Now what this will give, now if you noticed here in this value property, we are passing this value and the set value. Now set value is a method and value is a property, let's say. Now these two you will be able to destructure from my context, right? Because this will be object. And now let's say in this component you are having a button which is like some update property, or let's say some click property. What you need to do, right? So you need to update this value state that you are having inside your context from this component. So what we have done, we provide the context first, we pass the values here, and in the component first we consume the context, and then in this button click, very important, you can see that we are basically passing the set value method here in this button component, so that now if I click on this button, this will update the state variable in your context. So there is no direct connection, but you can see that from your component you will be able to update the state here, right? So this will be how you can update context values. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you use multiple context in a single component? Now this is very simple. As the name suggests, so whatever context you want to use, you need to create all the context. Let's say you have a first context using create context, second context using create context. Second step, again you need to provide. Now again, when you have multiple context, you need to basically wrap all of this. So first I wrap this my first context.provider, I pass the first value, then I pass the second context.provider, I pass the second value. If you have more, you will be able to nest it, and inside that only you'll be passing basically the children. Now children is nothing but all your components. So now let's say from first context you need to get the first value, from the second context you need to get the second value. So what you will do, again you need to use the use context. So first use context, and then you pass the first context that you have created, sorry, this context here, first context, and for the second one you pass the second context that you have created, and then you'll be able to access both first and second. If you have more, let's say third context, so you will pass again the third context here, then you'll be getting the value here, and then you'll be able to access that. All right, so how many context you need to create? You can create it. The only thing is that you need to provide all of this context here, and then you'll be able to use it in your component. Alright, now let's move on to the next one. Now again, this is almost like the similar kind of things. In the prop drilling part also we've discussed that what are the advantages of using context API over prop drilling. The question can be something like this also, like how you can avoid prop drilling, right? So that also we've discussed. So see here what context API does, it basically reduces the need of prop drilling, right? So you have multiple components, instead of passing the data in each and every label, what we can do, we'll keep the all the state in one place, and then whenever it is required we will be basically able to get the state from context. So this is what basically it is doing, and also it is making the code more readable and maintainable, obviously, right? It allows for easy setting of state and function across the components without passing the props through every level. This is very important. So this part you can basically mention that without passing props through every level, what you can do, right? You can basically create a context which will nothing but will basically avoid the prop drilling concept. So here you can see that without context API, what you are doing, you are creating, having a parent, then again child, then again grandchild, and then you are passing the value, something like this. Without context API, just create the provider and directly you will be able to pass it in the grandchild. You no need to nest it every time. So this will be the main advantage of using context API over prop drilling. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, now another very important hook, and you might guess this question also, like tell me what exactly use reducer hook is and when you should use it. Now see, use reducer is basically a alternative of use state. Alright, so we have use state hook, right? Use state basically used for state management. So here use reducer hook is basically used for state management only. It is suitable for handling more complex state logic. So whenever you have multiple things that you need to manage, multiple state and everything, it's better to use reducer instead of use state. The reason is because this is nothing but manages the state using a reducer concept. So all of this will be in one place and it is much more maintainable, and also readability will be more. So here you can see that how we are going to do that. So first we need to import use reducer from React, and then we need to take a state variable, right? Then there will be a dispatch method. We are going to discuss what exactly this dispatch method does, but first we have a state, we have a dispatch. We need to take the use reducer that we have imported from React. Then we need to pass the main reducer function, which consists all of this logic, and then we need to pass the initial state. Okay, now let's understand with this, right? Even if your interviewer tell you, okay, tell me with a simple example, give this kind of example only. Instead of count, you can also give like flag also. Let's you keep a flag as false, and then create a button, and then on click of this button make this flag as true, then create another button and make this one as false, something like that. So what it is doing, this state will basically give you the updated state. Dispatch will dispatch a method. So here we have a two button, right? And we have a plus button and we have a minus button. On click of this, I want to increase the count. So you will tell that, okay, whenever I'll click on this plus button, I will dispatch an action. And now what action basically does, this will have a mandatory type property. So this is mandatory, right? Type is basically will tell that, okay, for this particular dispatch action, what exactly I need to do in my reducer. For this one I need to do type of increment, for this button I need to do type of decrement. Let's say you have another button, there you need to do type of reset. When you pass this one in your reducer will consist of the state, which return the updated state, and also the action. This action is basically have a type. Now this type is nothing but this type that you are passing here. So what basically it will do based on different cases. So you took a switch statement, now you have a case of increment. So okay, so whenever you'll click on this plus button, it will check that, okay, now type is increment. That means this case I need to consider, or I need to execute. Whenever I'll do type of decrement, the reducer will understand, okay, now we have a case of decrement, so I need to decrease the count by 1. When I have an increment, I need to increase the count by 1. And once this is done, it will give you the updated state, right? And this updated state, from where you will be able to access, from this state. So this is your state, right? So this state will have your count property. So you have this count, right? If I do state dot count, see similarly what you have done, so you'll be able to see the count value in your browser, right? So in sum up, what we have done, so you have imported use reducer from React, which will take a state and a dispatch method. Dispatch will dispatch the action with a type property, and this type property is basically used to identify different cases, and whenever there is a case which will satisfy, it will return the updated state. If nothing, then you can return an error, or you can basically simply return the state here. So this is all about the use reducer hook. Now I highly suggest please practice this one by your own, right? Create a simple example and try to do it. Now let's move on to the next one. Now here this is a very simple one, like you might get asked, okay, give me some example with complex state object with use reducer. You no need to do anything. What you can do, right? Simply let's say take initial state, instead of passing only count, pass another text property, or let's say a flag property, right? And whenever you are doing increment, that time let's say you will increase the count by 1, and whenever there is another case, right, let's say there is another button which will update the text, and in that case what you can do, right, you can basically pass some text property and then you can update the state. So this is just to give you example that in this initial state you can have multiple nested object, and those you'll be able to easily manage using use reducer. So if your interviewer is asking you, okay, can we basically use use reducer for complex state objects, the answer will be definitely yes, because this is why use reducer is an alternative of use state, because this basically used to manage complex state management logics. All right, so now let's move on to the next one. How do you pass additional arguments to a reducer function, right? Now this is also very, very simple. What we need to do, right, you remember in the previous one, right, here we are passing dispatch and there we are passing a type of increment. In this dispatch object, type is always mandatory. I already told you, right? You can also pass some other properties also that you will be able to access in your reducer. For example, let's say you have a dispatch method and here you have a type of update. So type of update means this case will be updated, this case will be executed, and here in this object you are passing additional property, additional argument, and that is the question. And here you are passing a payload, and inside this payload you are having a value. So how you will be able to access it? So you can see that we are having access.type. Similarly, you will be able to use it using access.payload.value, access.payload.value, and this what we are doing. So we are doing access.payload.value. And this is not about only returning, but what you can do using this value, you can do certain things, right? In this case, let's say you need to do API call, not API call, but some manipulation, data manipulation you need to do, and based on that you need to return. So if your interviewer is asking you how you can pass additional arguments to his reducer function, the answer will be that whenever we dispatch action, it will have a type, right? And in this object we can basically pass additional properties like payload or whatever, and that will be able to access inside our reducer. All right, so that's all for this particular one. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, another one. Now this you can get little intermediate level of interviews, not for beginners, like how do you handle side effects using use reducer. Now this is actually possible. Now let's see with the example, right? So first we have an initial state, and there I have a data null and loading is true, right? So this data I need to get it from a API endpoint. First, I took a state, I have a dispatch, I have use reducer, and then my reducer function is this, and initial state is my data null and loading true. Now what we are doing, let's see, because we need to fetch the data on page load. So what we need to take? We need to take use effect, right? And empty dependency means this will run only once. And here you do the API call. So you do the API call, so you have API endpoint, we are getting the data. Once you will get the data, very, very important, that time you are dispatching a type that, okay, my data is now fetch success, and then my payload is the data. So this is the additional argument that we have just discussed, right? So here now this payload data, where you will be able to access? Action.payload, right? If I do action.payload, what it will give? It will give you the data that you are getting from your API response, correct? So that means you can tell your interviewer that we can implement a use effect. Inside this use effect, I'll do the API call, and then once I'll get the data back, that time I'll do a dispatch, and in that one I'll pass a type. So it will come here, and then I'll pass the data. So data will be your action.payload. So this action.payload, and loading you can make this one as false, right? So the answer is like, if they ask you that can you handle side effects using use reducer and then store the value instead, the answer will be yes, and this is how you can do it. All right, so now let's move on to the next one. Now next one is also another very important interview question, that what is useref hook, right? So the answer will be useref hook is used to access and interact with DOM elements, right? Also it can also use for uncontrolled form elements and those things. And what basically the advantage is that this is basically takes a mutable object, right, which will persist the values without causing re-renders every time. So what you can do, let's say you're doing some DOM manipulation and you are storing some value inside a ref. What it does, it will not re-render every time, right? So that is the reason you can use ref in those use cases. For example, let's say you have a requirement. If they ask you, okay, now I got your answer, now tell me with a simple example. So what you can do, right? Okay, so you can do that. Let's say I have an input, and I have a button, click. What I need to do, right, on click of this button I need to focus on this input. So focus means it will be like focused outside border something. So here you can tell your interviewer that okay, I can use here some ref property. So first, how you can do, again, first you need to import use ref from React, and then you need to create your input ref, right? You need to create the ref element. So use ref will take again the initial value, so in this case this is null, and then you need to basically pass this input ref to the DOM element that you want to use. For example, for this input I want to use this input ref. So to pass a ref, what you need to do, you need to use this ref property, and this has to be ref only. So in this ref I pass my input ref, right? And then on click of this, what I'm doing, this input ref will give you a current property. Very important. This ref will give you the current property, and inside this current property you will get lot of things, like all the things that you need. So from here you need to get the focus property. So what you can do, we can basically call input ref.current.focus. That means whenever I'll click on this button, I'm basically focusing on this input. Now this is one a very simple example, but this is how you need to basically do it. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so now next one, how can use ref can be used to store mutable values. Now this is kind of similar example that we have discussed in the previous one. So again, you can basically give another example, like let's say counter example, that there is a button, and on click of this I need to basically store this value inside a ref. So what we can do, again, we can import use ref from React. Then every time whenever you will do, so you'll take a counter ref, for example, and then here you take use ref, and this is your initial value, which is 0. And now what you can do, right, again I mentioned, right, this ref will give you the current property. So what we can do, we can basically on click of this, we need to increase the count ref by 1. So we'll do count ref dot current plus 1. That means every time I click, it will store the it will basically give you the updated count value, and that you can basically store it. So this is kind of that example. So either you can give this kind of example, or the input one is also really good that we have discussed in the previous one, right? Now let's move on to the next one. What is forward ref and when you should use it? So forward ref is basically, let's say you have some requirement, so you need to there are two components, and you need to pass a ref property or ref object from one component to another component. In that case, you can use the concept of forward ref, as the name suggests. So forward ref is a function that allows to pass refs through components to access DOM elements, right, or child component instances. How you can do that? So simply you can see that what we are having, right, you have a app component here, and there you have an input ref, and this is simply use ref of null. So this is your initial value. What you have done, you have a component here. You notice this is a custom component. So this is my input component, and here you are passing this ref as this input ref. What you need to do, right, you need to use this ref inside this component, because in this component somehow you don't have the input element. You have the input element in a different component. So what you can do, again I already mentioned, right, that to use a ref you need to use a ref property. So here you can basically use this forward ref function in this custom component, and what this will give you two arguments. First one will be the normal props. So let's say you are passing a props here that will be able to access here, and then it will give you the ref property. Very important. And this ref you can basically use here, right? So what you have done, again I'll recap. So first we'll give you the answer that forward ref is a function that allows to pass ref through components. As simple as that. Keep it simple. And then you will give this example that okay, I have an app component, and then I have another custom component, and in this custom component I have an input component. Somehow I need to pass ref to this input component. So what we can do, from this app component I can pass this ref as a prop. Not, this is not a prop, right, this is you are using as a forward ref. So you'll pass this ref here, then you wrap this my input inside this forward ref function, because this will be a function which will give you two arguments. One will be the normal props and one will be the ref. So this ref you'll be able to pass it now here. Now what you can do, you can do certain things, right, in this component also, because you are able to pass this ref from this component, from the app component, and then you'll be able to access it in a custom component. So this is what exactly forward ref is. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, now this is a important questions I'll say, like, because you can get theory plus you will get practical or hands-on also, because they can ask you, okay, tell me how you can do forms, handle forms and create a very simple input, and there will be a button, and one click of this button you need to submit the data in your API call. You no need to do the API call in your interview only, but they will see that how you are going to do the process. So what you will do, right, to give these kind of things, I'm again repeating, try to give this all of these questions answer using some example. It will be much more clear to basically explain to your interviewer, right? If your interviewer is not allowing you to write, then you can basically tell in a theory way. So first we will say that, okay, to create or manage forms, we need to basically first take our form element, right? So we need to wrap all of our elements inside form. So this will be your first step. So first create the JSX structure. So you have a form, and then I have a label, and then let's say inside this label I have an input which will have a type of text. Also take a name property here, take a ID property, then you have a onChange, this we have already discussed, and we have a value property. So now you will take a state which will store the current input onChange value. So you have a name, set name, which is use state of empty, right? And then in the onChange, what you are doing, simply you are basically saving the value in this set name. So let's say I have input here and I have a button. So whenever I'm typing something here, let's say I'm typing my name, you are storing this name Sangam inside this name value, right? And now inside this form you will take a button, and the type has to be submit. This is very, very important. Now these all the things that your interviewer will basically see. So type is submit. Now when the type will be submit, whenever in this form you need to take a on submit event, because whenever I'll click on this button, I need to get this value Sangam that I've typed, and let's say I need to pass it in a API call, right? So what you need to do, you need to take a on submit, which will be a method, and this will give a event. Now here you need to take this event.prevent default. This is also very important, and you can also ask like why you are writing this. So this is every time, because this is a form, you will click on this button, your page will be getting refreshed. Now to basically stop that behavior, what you are doing, you are basically preventing that using event.prevent default, right? And once you'll do this one, now what you can do, you can tell your interviewer that, okay, now I'll be able to get the name here in this handle submit, and then I'll be able to pass it to API call. So this will be the whole process. And again, I'm repeating, please try to practice this example using by your own. Okay, create a simple form. Instead of creating one input, create two input, right? And create a button, and then see if you submit this button, you will be able to access these values or not. So now let's move on to the next one. Now, okay, what are custom hooks and why do you need them? Now you can basically get this on a theory example, and then once you will tell the theory part, they can tell you, okay, now implement a simple custom hook, something like that. So what is custom hooks? So custom hooks are basically JavaScript functions that allow you to reuse the stateful logic across multiple components. Now what can be proper example of this? Let's say you are having 5 components, right? And each and every component you have a state, and then you need to do a API call every time you'll go from one component to another component. Means every time there is a API call that you need to do whenever we switch from one page to another page or one component to another component. So what you normally do it, right? So you need to take a use effect each and every component, correct? And then you need to do a API call, and then you need to store that in your state. But how you can basically minimize the effort here, so that instead of doing API call every time, you will do the API call in one place using a custom hook, and then you will reuse that in every component. So this is what exactly it is doing, that it is basically using reusable stateful logic across multiple components, right? And what it basically does without repeating code, very, very important, right? And also it promotes the code reusability and separation of concerns. Now what are the main advantages? Again, the code reusability will be more, then we have the separation of concerns, right? And then also cleaner code. This is also very, very important part, that cleaner code, because if you're moving your logic to common custom hooks, you are no need to write the same logic in every component, right? So that means it not only reusability will be more, but the code will be much more cleaner, and also it will be for other developers, it will be easy to understand. So this will be a proper answer, that of what are custom hooks and why do you need them. Now in the next couple of videos will be a couple of questions. We'll be learning some two hooks which will be mostly asked in your interview. So let's go to the next one. All right, very important. So implement use fetch custom hook. So this is that example. Let's say you have multiple components, and then every time instead of doing the API call, you will create a custom hook, use fetch, and then you'll be reusing the logic in every component. So how you are going to do that? So this is our hook logic, right? So hook, as I already told you, what this is JavaScript functions. So we'll give this one name as use fetch. Now what this will receive? This will receive a URL, right? This URL will be that from which endpoint you want to call the API, because from different components or different pages, the URL will be different, right? So you'll receive the URL as a input, then you will take a data and a set data, which will set your data and a loading state, and these all I'm not repeating again because we have already discussed. Now in this use effect hook, what you are doing, you are taking a use fetch hook. In this custom hook, you are taking a use effect and you are doing the API call, simple API call, and once that data is done, you are basically setting the data, right? Now the important part is that at the end you need to return the data and the loading state as an object value. Now whatever format you are passing, let's say you are passing as an object, it will be object. If array, it will be array, something like that. Now your custom hook is done. So now let's say from this component I need to use it. So how you can do that? So first we'll take const, and this will give us data and loading, right? Because this is what we are passing here, data and loading. Then you need to call the use fetch, and what you need to pass, you need to pass the URL, and simply pass the URL and see the logic, how minimized this is, right? Because you are doing all of these things in this custom hook. Now this is only for one component. Now let's say you are having 50 components, so you need to write this one line and then you will be able to get the data. This is the very huge advantage or improvements in your application that you can do, right? So this is how you can implement a use fetch custom hooks. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, now this is another one, but these also you can get like intermediate level of interviews, not very beginner level. Like implement use window resize custom hook. This is like whenever you resize your window, automatically it will tell the current width and height, right? So how we are going to do that? Again, this will be a function, JavaScript function, right? Use window resize, and here you are taken your state, which is your window resize, which will be current will be window.inner width and height will be window.inner height. Now what we are doing, you are taking a use effect, which is to handle the window resize events, and here you are taking a add event listener. And what you need to do, every time you resize the window, let's say you are resizing this window, you are going to call this function handle resize, and whenever I resize, that will give us current inner width and inner height, and that we are setting in our set window size here, right? And once this is done, we are basically removing the listener. And as simple as that. So what will happen, every time you resize the width and height of your current window, the width and height will change, and that you will be basically returning here the window size. Now let's say you need to use that in a component. So what we can do, simply call the use window resize, and what this will give us, this will give us width and height, and this is coming from this width and height here. Now whatever things you can do, let's say you need to implement width and height here, or let's say you need to implement some custom CSS. So whenever width will be less than 750, you need to make this h1 as red, so that you can simply check that if this width value is less than 750, I'll make this one red, or else it will be black. So this is just to example that this is how you can do. So keep your logic in one hook, and then you can reuse it in all the components. So now let's move on to the next one. Alright everyone, so next is what is React Router DOM and why it is used. Now we come into our one of the most important thing, that is routing concept. Now from this module you can get quite a few things, right? How you can implement routing and what are the libraries that you will use. So first see the simple example, like you will tell that normally we use React Router DOM. They can also ask you what is the latest version. So it is version 6, right? So React Router DOM is a routing library that built on top of React Router package, right? So what basically it does, you will be able to implement various kind of routing functionality. For example, moving from one page to another page, then you can implement dynamic routing, and these things you need to mention, right? It enables dynamic routing in web application, allowing you to define routes and navigate to different components without reloading the page. So this will be a very simple definition of React router DOM. Now let's move on to the next one. So now the questions can be very like simple one. Let's say, okay, now tell me how you can create a very basic route, or what are the component that you'll be using to create a simple route. So here the answer will be, to create a basic route we need to use the route component. What it takes a path property, that in which path you want to navigate, and then also it will take that, okay, if I go to, let's say, /login page, /login, which component I need to render. So this is what exactly we have done. So you need to tell that we need to use the route component of React router DOM. Here we need to pass a path that, okay, I need to go to the /home page, and whenever I'll go to the home page, I need to render the home component. Whenever I'll go to the, let's say, register page, I need to take an element which will be my register component, something like that, right? So this will be a very simple example, that you will take a route component, pass a path, and for this path which element you need to render, as simple as that. Now let's move on to the next one. Now they can also ask you like how to implement basic routing using React router DOM. So what we need to do, right? So first thing is that whenever we want to implement any routing functionality, we need to wrap our component or our app component or our root component inside this browser router. So they can ask you what exactly this does. See, we remember we have done this context, right? In the context you have a provider. Until unless you will provide this provider in your root component, you will not be able to access. So this is what exactly it does. Until unless you will wrap your app component inside browser router, you will not be able to use any of the route features, right? So that is the reason the first step will be you need to wrap this in your root component. So the best place is index.js file we are doing here, but it's better to do in the index.js or tsx file, the main root file. So first we have wrap it, so we have a browser router, and then we need to take this routes component. Very important. Now don't get confused with this route and routes. There is a s after this. What this does, right, in the previous version 5 and less, we have the switch component. Now what this does, let's say currently in this routes component will basically help you to switch from one page to another page. The reason is, let's say currently you are in the home page and there is a button, login button. Whenever you click on this button, you need to navigate to the login page. So that means from home page you need to change the path to a login page, right? So this, what routes component will do, this will help you to switch from one page to another page, and inside these routes you need to take all the route that you will be having. So let's say in your application you have 50 routes. So inside this route component you'll be creating 50 route component like this. So individual one for home, one for login, one for register, one for something else, so like that. And for each and every route you have again a path and the element. So this we have already discussed here, right? So this is how you need to implement very simple one. So if you do this and then let's say you want to go to the home page, then you will see that this home component will be getting rendered, right? So these all the steps you need to explain in your interview, and if you're able to explain like this, more than enough, right? You no need to do anything else. Now let's move on to the next one. How to create link to another route, means how you can go from one page to another page using a link. Let's say you have an app bar component. So this is your web page and you have an app bar, and here you have a home and here you have a login, right? And whenever you click on this home link, you'll be in the home page. Whenever you can click on the login link, you will be on the login. To implement this, first you need to import link component from React router DOM, and then you need to wrap this home here inside this link. And what it will take a to property, right? To means which path, in which path I want to navigate. So when I'll click on this home, I want to navigate to /home page. When I'll click on this about, I need to go to the /about page. If I have a login page, if I go to /login in this two, means I'll go to the login page, something like that. So the answer will be import the link component from React router DOM, and then use this link component and then pass a to property, and in this to property you need to pass the path name that you want to navigate to. As simple as that, right? Now let's move on to the next one. How do you use URL parameters or dynamic routing in React router DOM? Now what exactly is dynamic routing is the question might come. So you will give like this example that, okay, let's say I'm creating a e-commerce page and I have 5 products. whenever I'll click each and every products, I need to go to a details page, right? So this is your details page. So if I click on product 1, I need to show product 1. If I click on product 2, I need to click this, I need to show product 2. If I click on product 3, I need to see product 3. So that means every time this data will change. So somehow you need a dynamic routing. So how you can do, let's say this page that you are having, in this page you have a product list, your route name. Now whenever you click on this, you need to go to the details page, and the details page is something like this: /list/ for product 1 this will be 1, for product 2 this will change to 1 to 2. I hope you are getting. For product 3 this will be from 2 to 3, for 4 this will be 4, right? So that means this value is a dynamic value. So how you are going to do that? First you need to create the route. Now see, in the previous one we discussed, right, how you can create this route here. Path, you need to take the path and you need to take the element. So here again you need to take a path. The only difference is that for the dynamic value, so this is the dynamic value, you need to take this colon, simple as that. This colon means you are telling this route that okay, this route is now a dynamic route. Okay, so this is how you need to do it, and here you need to again pass the element. Now to access this value, to get this value from your URL, you need to use this use param hook from use route React router DOM. So what this param will give you, this will give you this user ID value. So you can see that you'll be able to get this user ID and then you'll be able to render it. So for example, you are going to a user of ID 100. So here you'll be getting 100. For 100, you are getting another user for 100, 150, you'll be getting 150. So this will be your dynamic value, and to do that you need to take this colon, 2 colon, and then you need to pass the something like user ID or whatever you will pass. Alright, so this is how you need to create a dynamic routing. Now let's move on to the next one. How you can perform a redirect in a React router DOM. Now this first give a simple example that okay, we can use navigate component to perform a redirect, right? So again the simple example is that, let's say first you need to import navigate from React router DOM and you have a login page, right? So let's say if the user is not logged in, you need to go to the home page. If the user is logged in, then only will be in the login page or something, in the login page or any whatever. So here what we have done, we are checking that is logged in, right? So if this is the user is logged in, what we are doing, I told you opposite. So if the user is logged in, we are navigating the user to the home page. If the user is not logged in, the user will be in the login page. But this is not about the question. The question is how you can navigate. So you need to use this navigate component, right? And then you need to pass the to property, that which path you want to go. So if the user is logged in, I want to go to the home page, so you need to take the component and pass the to, and then you pass the path name, as simple as that. All right, now let's move on to the next one. What is routes component in React router DOM? I think we already discussed these routes, right? That this route is basically it will basically check or basically help you to switch from one page to another page. How it will do, it will check the matching route is rendered. What is this matching route is rendered? For example, it will check that for this route the path is home. So now if in the browser, if I search for /home, so it will match this route with this route, and it will check okay, there is a match from this home and home, so I need to render the home element. I hope you are getting. If you search for /about, so again it will check okay, there is a match. This about page means user want to go to the about page, so it will check okay, which path is the about, so it will check this one, so it will render the about component. All right, so this will help you to switch from one page to another page. It will check that which matching route I need to render. All right, so this will be the routes component uses in React router DOM. Now let's move on to the next one. Now another very important question, that how you can handle nested routes in React router DOM. So what exactly mean by nested routes? I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say you are having a page, and here let's see this example only, that you are having a dashboard page, and in this dashboard page, let's say you are having a common part which is your home or dashboard. So this part will be common for all the pages. Only this part will change here. So let's say you will go to /dashboard/login. So this part will always be same, but here we need to show the login page. If you go to /dashboard/profile, we need to show here the profile page. If you go to /dashboard/settings, we need to show the settings page. So that means we need to somehow create a nested component here, but every time this part will be always common. So let's say how we are going to do that. First, again, you need to take the routes, which is to switch, and then you need to take a route component here, which is your home route dashboard, and you'll tell that okay, I'll need to render the dashboard element, and inside this route you have all the nested routes. So inside dashboard I can have a profile page, I can have a settings page, I can have 10 other pages, right? And how you're going to render in this dashboard component, very important, you see this part here. So this part is this common part. So this is the common part, means every time you'll go to /dashboard route, this dashboard, this part will always be getting rendered. So how you'll be able to switch then this part I'm talking, this part. So this you need to switch using this outlet component. Whenever you'll pass this outlet, React router DOM will check okay, there is some nested routes, and it will come here and check okay, yes, there is 2 nested routes. So that means if I go to /dashboard /profile, I need to render the profile page. If I go to /dashboard /settings, I need to render the settings page. To nested this, you need to use this outlet component. I hope you are getting. And this part will be always common. So this is this part. So now let's move on to the next one. Now this is a very simple one, that how you can handle 404 pages or not found page. Let's say you are going a ABCD page and this page doesn't exist. So you'll show user that okay, this page doesn't exist, something like that, or not found page. And to do that, it is very simple. First create a component. Let's say I created a not found component and I'm getting 404 not found. And to map this, what you can do, right, you need to pass the element not found, and in this path you need to pass this star. This is the important one. So if you pass star here, so that means React router DOM will understand okay, this route is a not found route. So whenever user try to go to a route which doesn't exist, it will render this not found page, right? And the main trick part is you need to pass the path. If you don't pass the path as star, it will not work, right? So this is how you need to implement not found page in React router DOM. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, how do you programmatically navigate using React router DOM? So what exactly mean by that? Let's say you are having 2 buttons. On click of one button you need to go to /home page. On click of one button you need to go to the /login page, and then there is one more button. Here in this case you need to do some logic, some API call. Once you'll get the API response, then only you need to navigate. So that means this will be a programmatically you need to navigate. How you can do that? You need to use this use navigate hook from React router DOM. I'm going little fast, but I'm again repeating, please implement all of these hands-on. Means don't see this video and then you will say okay, I'll be able to do it. If your interviewer asks you to do an example, then it will be very tricky, because I know from my own experience that even if I know everything, in interview the situation will be completely different. Some easy things also will not be able to do it. So I'm suggesting please try to implement all of this by your own. See this example and then write it and see whether you are able to do it or not, and also see how much time you are taking. So first you need to take use navigate hook, and then we take the use navigate, which is navigate, and then simply let's say I have a button, and on click of this button I need to go to the home page. Call this navigate, and inside this navigate you need to pass that which path you want to navigate. So this will be navigate, and then here you need to give the path. So whatever path you will provide here, it will go to that page. So this is how you need to programmatically navigate. So you need to use this use navigate custom hook. All right, now let's move on to the next one. All right, so next one, explain use callback hook with example. Now there are 2 hooks that we need to discuss, that is use callback and use memo. Both are used for memorization and also performance improvement. So the example or definition will be that use callback hook is used to memorize callback function, right? This means the function provided to the use callback will only recreated or only run if one of its dependency will change, right? And if after this they will ask you to give examples of what we can do, right? Simply, so let's say we have a component here, and then we have a child component, right? So what we are doing, right, so you can see that in this child component I have a button, and where I need to do some kind of expensive calculation, right? So what we can do, because this child component I'm using as a child in this parent component, so I can pass a callback as a prop, which will be my memorized callback. This memorized callback will be a function which will be wrapped inside use callback, and here we are basically passing this expensive computation as a dependency. Now this is not has to be only getting from props. this can be any dependency. So what exactly I mean by that, whenever we'll call this memorize callback from this component now, because here we are passing as a callback, this component will not re-render until unless the callback changes. So this callback is this memorize callback. Now when this will change, whenever there is a change in this expensive computation prop value, right? So this is what exactly we are telling, that if it will only getting recreated if one of its dependency will change. One more very important point, whenever you will be passing a callback, you need to also wrap your my child component inside the react memo component, right? React.memo. So this also we are going to see, because if you mention this point, you can get a counter question, okay, now tell me what exactly react memo is. So this we are also going to discuss, but first try to understand the use callback. So use callback is basically a hook that you use to memorize callback function, and you'll pass a dependency. Whenever there is a change in the dependency, that time this memorize will this callback function will be getting rendered. Now let's move on to the next one. See, again, explain use memo. Now both are almost similar but not so, like there are some differences. Differences is that, as the name suggests, callback basically memorize a callback function. Use memo memorize a value. So that is the only difference. See, use memo hook is used to memorize expensive calculation, so that they are not recalculated on every render, right? It takes a function to compute a value. This is the important, right? An array of dependency. So if any of the dependency will change, then only it will recompute or recalculate the value, or else it will not. See this example, very simple one. First you need to import from React. Now let's say we are doing some expensive calculation here, right? What I want to do, right? For example, here you noticed one thing, we have one more state, count and set count, and there is a button. Every time clicking on this button, this count value I'm increasing from 0 to 1, 2, 3 and 4. In normal use case, what will happen, right? If you don't create this part here, let's say this part is not exist, every time we'll click on this button, the state is getting changed. Now what will happen if the state changes? In React, if there is a change in state, the component will re-render. If the component will re-render, every time you are re-rendering this part, this computation value function, and this is very important, every time you are re-rendering, although you can see there is no changes here, you are only changing the count value, but still this function is getting re-rendered. Not function, this value is getting re-rendered. So how you can stop this? So you can wrap this function inside use memo, right? And you will tell that, okay, here we are passing this count as a dependency, but that is fine. It's not about the count. Let's say you have some different value. So you'll tell that, okay, whatever dependency I'll pass here inside this expensive value will be recalculated whenever there is a change in this dependency. As simple as that. If there is no change in this dependency, this function will not be getting called. So that is the main difference from use callback and use memo. Use callback is used to memorize callback function. On the other side, use memo is used to memorize a value, and in both the cases you need to pass a dependency array. Whenever there is a change in the dependency, and based on that it will recalculate. Now let's move on to the next one. Now again, explain React memo with example. So what exactly React memo? So React memo is a HOC component, higher order component, that memorize the result of a component, right? What it does, again, it used for like performance improvement, so that it will not re-render the component until unless the props are getting changed, right? So what we're going to see, previous example you have seen, right? Here we have a count value and we have a button, very simple one, and we are increasing the count by 1. Now I have a child component, and in this child component, if you notice, this my component is the child. Here I am passing this count as a prop, and what I have done, this my component I wrap inside this memo, right? This is a higher order component. When I'll wrap this in this memo, this component will understand, okay, now this component will only re-render if this value prop will change, or else not. And this value prop is this count value. That means every time we'll click on this button, this component will be getting rendered. But let's say you are having some different state also here. If those states will change, this component will not get rendered. The reason is because this value will not be getting changed, right? So that means whenever we wrap this inside memo, it will check that if any of the props are getting changed, then only this component will render here, this one. So this is the main advantage of React.memo. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Alright, explain the reconciliation process in React and how it works. See here, this process is basically to update the DOM efficiency. If you remember, we have the concept of virtual DOM. So what basically does, React keep a track of the virtual DOM and the real DOM, and it will compare using some algorithm. What it checks that if there is a change in that virtual DOM, then only those part will be getting updated in the real DOM, right? So what basically is that this process is comparing. So this is the process that is called the reconciliation, that it compares the new virtual DOM with the previous one and determine that the minimum number of changes needed to do to update the actual DOM. So here you can see that we are having some list of items. So we have item 1, 2, 3, let's say 4. Now whenever I'll click on this button, let's say I'm adding a new item. So when I'll add a new item, right, this new item only will be getting added in our previous DOM, because this will be your new virtual DOM where you have a new item. So it will compare that, okay, in the previous DOM I have only 4 items, but in the new one I have 5 items. So this is the new that is getting added. So it will only add this part in our virtual in our main DOM on the or basically the real DOM. And this comparing process is basically called the reconciliation process. Now let's move on to the next one. What are pure components? Now these pure components are basically based on the class based components in React, right? So in normal functional component you use memo, in class based component you use the pure component. So what basically it does, that pure component is a base class in React that implement the should component update. So this is the same logic, that if you want to check that, okay, if there are any changes in my prop, then only I want to render this component or else not. And to implement this, what you can do, so what it helps to unnecessary re-render, right? So what it does basically, first you need to create a parent component, and in this parent component you are basically managing some state, and then you are calling your child component, right? This child component you need to extend with pure component. So this pure component you need to import from React. If you do that, then what will happen, React will check that, okay, if there is a change in this prop, then only I will render this component or else not, right? So this is what is the pure component is. So for functional component you can use memo, for class based component you can use the pure components. Now let's move on to the next one. Now what is higher order component? Explain with example. See, higher order component is similar logic as higher order function. So higher order component is a function that takes another component and returns a new component with some extra added functionality, and this feature is basically used to reusing component logic, right? So how it will work, so let's say here you can see that I have a simple my component, which is component is loaded. What I've done, I created a higher order component here which received the component as an input, because I already told you, right, that higher order component takes a component and returns a new component. And this component, if I call here, you can see I'm calling this with loading, and then I'm passing the my component, this component as an input. So this component it will receive here, then it is returning a new component. See, class with loading extend react.component. And here what you are doing, the simple logic is that you are doing certain things and then you are returning a new component here. And what will happen, this is for one example, let's say the same logic, this part here, this part you need to do it in 100 components. So instead of doing it in multiple places, what you can do, right, every time whatever component you will be creating, you can wrap that component inside this HOC or higher order component. So what will be the advantage? The advantage is that you are not writing this logic every time 100 times, you are reusing this logic and you are using this as a part of a higher order component. So that is the example or the definition of HOC in React. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright everyone, so now we comes into another new topic, and that is called Redux. So we have covered the context API. Now we have also alternative as Redux or Redux toolkit. So what is Redux, and explain the core principle. See, Redux is basically state management library, right? And that is the very important part, is that this is predictable state container for JavaScript apps. This is not for only React. You can use Redux in others also, like Angular, Vue. So Redux acts as a centralized store, means in one place you have all the store and then you just consume it like in your application. So what are the advantages? That single source of truth. The single source of truth is basically nothing but that all the component state is stored in a single object. Simple as that. It's read only. That means you can only change the state to emit action that we are going to see in the next videos, but you will be explaining all of this. And changes will be made on pure functions, right? Pure function is means that takes the previous state and action and return the next state. So these three are the main like advantages and what exactly basically Redux is. Now let's see all of this with simple example. So now next is what are actions in Redux? Explain with example. See, actions are plain JavaScript objects that describes that what happened in the application. For example, I have a button and I need to click on this button and I need to decrement the count by 1. So whenever I click here, I need to dispatch action, right, to my Redux store. So you have a React and your Redux. So this is your Redux and this is your React. So you have a button in Redux, right, React, right, and you need to tell that okay, whenever I'll click on this button I need to go to Redux store and I need to dispatch action and I need to inform my Redux that okay, whenever I'll click on this button decrement the count by 1. So that is what exactly actions are. Actions are simple JavaScript. So you can see that this is the increment actions that I have created, which is basically dispatching a type. If you remember, we have done this one in use reducers also, right? We are dispatching a type, and here this type is very important. This is mandatory because this type will basically tell what exactly this action is doing. For this one we are doing an increment, for this one we are doing a decrement, for other we are doing something else. So type has to be there. So this is exactly what actions in Redux are. Now let's move on to the next one. Explain reducers in Redux with a example. So reducers are basically a pure function, right, which takes the current state and action and returns the updated state based on the action type. Remember, we have dispatch action, right, and here we are having a type, and in this type we are basically telling that okay, in this reducer that I have a action dot type, this is my type of increment, and if this is increment, return me the updated state with increment. If this is a decrement, return me the updated state with decrement. So this is what exactly reducers are, and you need to basically mention that pure functions that it takes the current state and action, and this action will have a type. This type will basically tell that which thing I need to do, and based on that it will return you the new state or the updated state. Now let's move on to the next one. What is the role of Redux store, or how you can create a Redux store, right? See, just like in the context we have a provider, right, and then you are wrapping that in your app component. So here you are having the app. Similarly, when you will create a Redux store, this store holds the whole state tree of your application and you need to wrap it. So that we are going to see, but you need to basically explain that the store, Redux store holds the all the state tree of your application. It allows to access to the state via either you can use get state, or you can dispatch action using dispatch, or basically register using subscribe, right? So here you can see that we are creating a create store and we are passing the reducer function, which basically nothing but returns the updated state. And then you can use something like get state, or you can also dispatch it, and then you'll be getting the updated state. So for example, first time state count is 0, so you're getting count is 0 1, then you are dispatching a type of increment. So when you dispatch a type of increment, it will go here, it will increase the count by 1, and next time when you will do, so count is now 1. I hope you are getting right. But from the question perspective, the answer will be store is basically holds all the application state in your Redux store. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, how to connect React with Redux store using connect. Now they can specifically mention that how you can do using connect, because there are other ways also we can do that. So if they ask you how you can do using connect, so what you need to do, that connect is basically a function. First you need to import it from React Redux package. So React Redux package will give you the capability to connect your React with your Redux store, because see, Redux is a completely different thing. You need to connect both. So this package will help you to connect both React and Redux. Then you need to first import the connect function, and here what you need to do, right? So first let's say you are creating two things. One is your map state to props. So this map state to props will give you the updated state from your Redux store, and this map dispatch to props is nothing but the dispatching the action to your Redux store. And then what you need to do, right? You need to basically map all of these state to props and map dispatch to props inside this connect function. So you can see that we take our connect function, we pass map state to props and map dispatch to props, and then we wrap this in our component. So this component, now what we have done, so we basically tell that okay, this is our component. Now we are connecting this component with a Redux store, and these all the things that we need. We need the count value, and also we are dispatching action. So this action is nothing but this increment, right? So this is what exactly you need to do. So these things you no need to give example, because they will not tell you to, okay, tell me with example. Sometimes they will say, but first they will see the theory. So in the theory, basically you need to tell that connect is a function that connect your React component with your Redux store, right? It basically maps your state. So this is the state, and also the action using map dispatch to actions. So this will be your answer. Now let's move on to the next one. And now comes the very important part, because this is what we currently used, that what exactly use selector hook is and use dispatch hook is, right? See, if you don't use this connect, nowadays I think no one uses, because most of us we use selector and use dispatch. What basically this does, right? So use dispatch is basically dispatch a action, as simple as that. Use selector is give you the updated state from Redux store. So let's say you have a Redux store, right, and you have a count value which is 1. You need to get this value from Redux and you need to render in your React. So you need to get this value somehow in your React component, right? So use reducer basically will help you to get this from your Redux store. Simple. Then you have use dispatch. Dispatch is nothing but, let's say you have a button here in this React and you need to dispatch action to your Redux store, and here you can use this use dispatch. Simple, very simple. So first you need to import use dispatch, take this dispatch, and then on click you can see we are dispatching an increment action. This is our action. And what is this action? We have already discussed. This action is with a type, right? So you're dispatching action, and using use selector you'll be able to get the updated state. Means it is something like this. Let's say you have a button, you are dispatching action, right? It will do certain operation, it is giving you the updated state, and then you're getting the updated state back, something like that. Again you click, this will become 2 because you're increasing the count. Again you dispatch, this will become 3, right? So these two hooks are very important. One is use selector and one is use dispatch. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, what is Redux toolkit? And this is what currently we are using. So Redux toolkit is basically the official toolset for your Redux development. So currently we don't use separate Redux and those things. We normally use Redux toolkit, right? Because it gives you some very simplified stored setup, some reducer boilerplate, and also you can use some tools like create slice, create async thunk, and those things, right, for API calls and everything. So this will be the definition of Redux toolkit. Now from here you might get some of the things, some queries that we are going to see. So the first thing we'll be getting, how you can configure global store in your Redux toolkit. Very important. Now these things you might get. That means how you can create a store. Again, I'm repeating that we have discussed that in context, we need to wrap our provider inside app, right? Similarly, when you use a Redux, you need to wrap your app component inside store, something like this. This is your app component, and then you need to wrap inside store. So this is your global store, and inside global store, you will be having your app component. So how you can do that? So basically, you will tell that, okay, I will use configure store method from Redux toolkit, and this configure store will give us the will help us to create our main global store. So here inside this configure store we need to pass the reducer, all the reducers, very important, and this is mandatory. If you don't pass any reducer, it will not work. So inside this configure store you pass the reducer, and this will give you the global store. And then what you can do, right, you need to use a component that is called provider, so that we are going to see later. But to answer this question, that how you can configure store, answer will be very simple. We need to import configure store from Redux toolkit, and this configure store, in this will be a method where we need to pass all the reducer, and this will create our global store. That's it. Now let's move on to the next one. Now what is create slice in Redux toolkit? Explain with an example. Now see, these kind of things is only help you if you already worked in Redux. If you're coming here for the first time and you are seeing all of this create slice, you'll not be able to understand. So that's why I already mentioned in the first time that this video will be for those who have already worked all of this, and this is just to give you, or basically you'll be able to revision purposes. Let's say you have an interview in 2 days, you'll be able to check all of this so that you'll be able to answer. So what exactly create slice is, right? Create slice is a function that generate your action creators, action types, and also the reducers. So how you can do that? So create slice will be, first we need to import from Redux toolkit. This will be a method which will take a name. So name is nothing but your identifier. So this is your counter slice. It will take an initial state and it will take the reducer. In this reducer you will be having the action creators. So these all your action creators. This is also action creator. So this is your increment action, this is your decrement action. And then at the end, what we need to do, we need to export these actions, so increment and decrement, so that we will be able to call all of these from our React app. And at the end, you need to export this reducer. Once you export this reducer, what you need to do, if I go back, you need to pass this reducer here. So here you will pass counter, will be your counter reducer. So once you pass this reducer, then only you'll be able to access it. So this is what exactly create slice does. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so now we'll come into another section which is very important. So here actually you might get this question that tell me about control components in React and uncontrolled components, what is the difference, and give me one simple example, right? So here you need to basically tell the exact definition. So control components are components where the form data, very important, is handled by React state. It's very important actually, right? React state means, let's say you have here, see this, we have input, and then we are managing this input value using what? Using a state. So this is what exactly we are telling, that form data is handled by React state. The input value is always driven by React state. So here we have a state that we are managing here. So this is what control component is. What is uncontrolled components? Move on to the next one. Uncontrolled components are React components where form data is handled by DOM itself. Very important. You might get this question. The input data is not driven by React state. So if I go to the previous one, right, here you can see that we have a state, and then based on that we are managing the input value. But here what we have done, we take an input ref, or basically we are managing using ref, using DOM, and then we have passed this input ref in this ref, and then how we'll be getting the value. So here you'll be getting the value from what? From your React state. Here we'll be getting the value from input ref dot current dot value. So this is the difference, that control components where the form data will be handled by React state, whereas uncontrolled components, the form data will be handled by DOM itself. So you need to take ref, and from there will be, from the current property you will be getting the value. So this is the difference between control components and uncontrolled components. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next, how do you optimize performance in React application? This is also extremely important. Now here you no need to write any code and everything. You need to basically mention all the points, and whatever points you'll mention, from there you might get some counter example or question. So here first thing is that we can use some hooks like use memo, use callback to memorize expensive calculation. We can use suit component update, or we can also use React memo or pure components that we have already discussed. We can also do something like code splitting and lazy loading. So these are all the things that you can basically mention. Now here once you mention all of these, they can ask you, okay, now you mentioned use memo and use callback, okay, tell me what exactly those are, how you can use react.memo component, how to implement code splitting or lazy loading, something like that. But to give this one in a very short answer, these are the points that you can mention. Now let's move on to the next one. What is code splitting in React? Again, I told you, right, that either you can get like, tell me what is how to optimize performance, or you can get those questions separately, that tell me code splitting in React in a very simple example. Because in interview you will not get like you need to implement code splitting from scratch, right? They will ask you 20 questions, 10 questions, and out of which one of them will be something like this. So you will tell that, okay, code splitting is a feature that allows us to split your code in various bundles, right, and which can be loaded on demand, right? And how you can do that? So simply you need to import this lazy, and also you need to import the suspense from React. Then this lazy will be, you can see we are dynamically importing this home and the about component, right? Just pass instead of passing it here, we are lazily basically importing all of this component, and then this we are passing in your route. So this is how you need to basically do that. And also we are wrap the switch component or the routes component that we are having inside suspense, and suspense is basically give you the fallback. So if anything goes wrong, then it will basically show you the fallback data for now. So this is how you can do that. So import lazy, suspense, and then lazily import the components, each and every individual components, and then wrap your content or components inside suspense and pass a fallback component. So inside this fallback you can pass any other custom component also. Now let's move on to the next one. What are render props in React? Give an example. Render props is basically a technique to sharing code between React component using a prop whose value is a function, right? And this function will return a React element. What exactly is that? So here I have a app component and I have a my component, which is a child component. What we are doing, right, we are passing a render prof here, which is a function returning a JSX, right? So this is render prof and passing a function which is a JSX. This I'll be receiving here and simply call this method. So this will render this JSX in your browser. So that means from definition perspective, it is a technique for sharing code between React components whose value will be a function. All right, now let's move on to the next one. What are portals in React? Now these get very rare, these kind of questions, but sometime you'll get, so that's the reason I included. See, portals provide a way to render a children into a DOM node that exists outside of your DOM hierarchy. So you have a real DOM, virtual DOM, right? So let's say your app component or root component. What will happen if you use portal? This portal is basically will render the DOM outside of that DOM tree, right, of the parent component or basically the root component. And where it is helpful to implement for models, tooltip, overlays, these kind of things. So this you can mention, and you can also see the example how we are doing this. We have a state, then there is a button which is opening a model, and we have a model component, right? This is the model component, and here we're passing this is open as a prop, and then we are receiving this is open. So you're checking if is open is false, will render nothing, or else we'll create a portal, right? So React DOM dot create portal we need to use, and then we are basically telling that create this portal and append this in our document.body, which will be outside of your root component. So this is how you can do that, right? And this is very, very helpful. Not very, very helpful, I'll say, like you can use it for models, tooltip, and some overlays, something like that. And this will be how you need to do that. So now let's move on to the next one. How do you implement lazy loading in React? I think this also you have discussed in that part, that lazy loading can be implemented using combination of react.lazy and suspense. What it basically does, it basically load the components on demand and it improves the performance, simple as that. So I think we already done that. We need to import lazy, suspense, use the lazy, import the component dynamically, and then pass this inside suspense and pass a fallback property. Fallback you need to pass because if something goes wrong, it will render that fallback component till that. So this is how you need to implement lazy loading in React. Now let's move on to the next one. Now we are going to discuss some of the TypeScript related things, because if your interviewer or requirement is TypeScript, they can also ask you some TypeScript or some testing related things also. Those two things we need to check. Alright, first, how do you define props in a functional component? Very, very simple, right? Whenever TypeScript means you need to define the type. So you create a functional component, you need to basically tell them, okay, I have a functional component and this is my props. So these props I'll be receiving, and these props is nothing but the interface, and here you need to pass all the properties, that what are the props you think that this component will receive from your parent component. So you created the props using interface, you pass it in this component, and then you'll be able to use it. See, these all the things are not very tricky. If you already worked in TypeScript, this will be very, very simple. Still, I thought it will be better to mention all of these points also. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you use UST Hook with TypeScript? So again, these are very simple, right? If you are using UST, then you need to basically define the type here. So for example, if your initial value is 0, which is a number, you'll pass a number. If this is false, you will pass a boolean here. If this is a string, you'll pass a string here, something like that. So you need to basically tell the type. So you can define the type of state variable by useState in the useState generic. So you're basically typing here, right? Give the type in this generic. So this is how you need to use useState Hook with TypeScript. Let's move on to the next one. How do you type event handlers in React with TypeScript? Again, first you need to take the useState. In the generic we mention that, okay, this is a type of string, so that is the reason to take a string. Then I have an input where I have a handle change. Now this is very important. Here in normal JavaScript you need to take only the event, but you no need to specify the type. But here you need to specifically tell that, okay, this is a change event, for example, and this is a HTML input element. This is very important. If this is text area, you need to tell this is a text area. If this is select, you have to mention this will be a HTML select element. So this is how what you need to mention. If you don't mention, you will get error. And don't tell in interview that I will use any type. Any type is not recommended to use. You need to basically tell that, okay, whatever components I have used, let's say if it's a input, I need to basically tell this is an input element. If it is select, it will be select, something like that. So this is how you need to basically type your event handlers in React with TypeScript. Let's move on to the next one. How do you handle optional props in React components with TypeScript? This is very important. Like this is a TypeScript like concept. To handle anything optional, you need to use this question mark. If there is a question mark, means this is optional property, you might get, you might not get. So this is what we have done. We have a react.fc means functional component. We have a props, and here we have a title which is a string and subtitle, and there is a question mark here. That means this subtitle is a optional property. Either you can receive it here or you cannot receive it. So this is what you need to mention, that you can use this question mark operator to tell React, to tell TypeScript that this property is optional. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you use reducer hook with TypeScript? Now again, this is like you need to basically give the type everywhere, right? So for example, we have a state, we have a dispatch, reducer, and initial state. So in the initial state, if you notice, I created a interface which is my state interface, and here I'm mentioning that I will have a count. The property of count will be number. So this is the first step. Let's say you have one more. Let's say you have a text which will be string, you need to mention. Then in your reducer, we have a state and action. So for each and every state, we have a type. So for this state, we have a state interface. For action, we have a type interface, right? Because action can have a type here. So you need to mention the type can be either increment or decrement. Let's say you have some more, you will give or these or these or this, something like that. So type can be either increment or decrement, and you need to specify this action here, right? And what it will return? It will return the state. What is the state? Again, this is your interface. So this is how you need to basically type your use reducer hook in TypeScript. Let's move on to the next one. How do you type context API in React with TypeScript? This is also like, these all are the same things. I just thought that it would be better to mention. So first thing is that when you create a context, right, we have a context which is create context. You need to basically pass the context type, context value, which is an interface. This will have a count, which will be a number, and this will have a increment, which will be a method. So this is what I mentioned here, correct? Then I have a count provider, which will be a functional component. It will receive a children. Children can be of React node. So this I mentioned, that children it will receive, which will be a React node, as simple as that, right? And this is what exactly you need to type. Whenever you create a context, you need to give the type of context, and whenever you create a provider, you need to basically give that what kind of props or children it will receive. And that's it. So this is what you need to mention in your interview also, and this will be more than enough. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, now we come into very important thing, and that is called testing. So test cases, they can ask you some questions like, okay, tell me how you can write test in your current company, or do you have any idea on what are the things that we can use? So you'll basically tell that, okay, for testing React apps, we can use Jest, or we can use RTL. RTL is React Testing Library. So Jest is basically testing framework that is created by and maintained by Facebook, right? So they can basically tell you that how you can write a simple test in Jest. So what you need to mention that, okay, test will start with this test keyword, or we can also use it keyword, it. Okay, so each and every test or it means this is a test block. So here, first thing you need to give a description that what exactly this test is doing. So here we are adding two items and we are checking if 1 plus 2 is 3 or not. So this will be your description, and then it will give you a callback method. So in this callback method, you need to write all your logic. So this is exactly how you need to mention that inside this callback, I will have expect that I'm expecting 1 plus 2 to be 3. Now, this is not the only thing. You have thousands of logic that you can write, but I'm giving one simple example that how you can write a test case. So you need to start with test keyword, or you can use it keyword. You need to give a description. It will have a callback, and inside this callback, you need to basically write all the logics which exist of all the matchers and everything that you can do. So this is what will be the answer for this particular question. Let's move on to the next one. All right. How do you render a component for testing using React testing library? Because whenever you test a component, first you need to render that component, right? So to render using React testing library, you need to use this render method. So first you'll import this render method from React testing library, and then again you'll do the test keyword, and you'll specify the description that I'm testing the component whether it is rendering or not, and it will take a callback method. And here you just have to pass render, which is this method, and you need to pass the component that you are testing. So you imported the component and then you pass this one. So this is how you need to basically render a component for testing using React testing library. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you find elements in DOM using React testing library? Now here the question, this answer can be very vast, right? It is not a single thing, because there can be multiple things you can do. But in interview you can give some simple example that, okay, whenever I need to find any elements in a component, right, first I need to render the component. This is the first step. So to render a component, we'll render from React testing library, and then what I'm checking that, okay, I'm checking in this component I have a text or not. Let's say I have a hello world text, and to do that we can basically use screen method from this React testing library, which will give us all the matchers. So here this is one of that, get by text, something like that. You have get by role, like lot of things you can have, get by tag, right? So here we are basically checking the element that if this text is present in this component or not. So we are doing screen.get by text and this component, and then we are checking that, okay, this element to be in the document means this element has to be in our browser or in our DOM. So this is what you can do. So you first render the element, check using a matcher that whether this element is present or not, by what. So you are expecting this element to be in the document. So this will be the simple example. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you simulate user events or on click in your React testing library? And this is also like not very tricky, but simple. First you need to render the component again, right? And then first you are checking the button. First you are getting the button. So you have a button, right? Click button, let's say. So first how you are getting? By role, get by role. So this is what I mentioned. So you have get by text, get by role. So you are getting the button, and then you are passing the increment. So let's say you have a button here which says increment. So first you are getting the button, and then you are importing another method that is called fire event. So what it does that you are telling that fire event dot click on button means every time you click on this increment button, this is what exactly this will do. And then what I will do that I will checking whenever I'll click on this button, the count one should be in the document. So first time it will be 0. I fired this event here, so I clicked one time, this will become 1. Right, again I clicked, this will become 2. So that means that is what exactly I'm checking, that if I click on this button, the count one should be in the document. So this is how you need to explain in an interview that how you can handle user events in your React testing library. Let's move on to the next one. How to test props in React testing library. Now to test a props, again and again, the first thing will be always to render the component. So you render the component and you pass a dummy props. That we are passing a props which is title, and what I'm checking that I'm expecting this title to be in the document, that this title, test title, should be in our DOM. As simple as that. Let's say you have another prop which is a number and you're passing 100. So again we'll check, expect this 100 to be in the document. So what will be the step? So first you will tell your interviewer that first I need to render this component, and then I'll pass a dummy prop here, whatever props this component is expecting, and then I need to check whether this title is present in the document or not. As simple as that. Now let's move on to the next one. Now from this part I created some questions where you will get some hands-on interview questions also, right? Hands-on. Right, so first thing, like your interviewer can tell you like, okay, create a control input element. Now this is not theory questions, these all are hands-on. So what I'll suggest, please try to implement all of this by your own. Again we learn, right, how you can create a control component. So control component means which state will be managed by component state. So we have an input, we have a button, we take a state, we manage the handle on change, and then we are doing a handle click that we are rendering the current value. Now I'm not going to explain all of this in details, because the reason I created this question so that it will give you some hands-on experience also. So this is one of the question, create a control input element. So try to create this. Let's move on to the next one. Another question, implement toggle visibility of a component. means you have a button and you have a component. First time you'll click on this button, you need to show this. Again you'll click on this button, you need to hide this. This is what exactly this will do. So how we can do that? So we have a parent component, we have a button, and on click of this, what we are doing, we are basically toggling this set visible from true to false, false to true, and then simply we are doing if visible, if this is true, then only I will render this child component or not. Please try to implement by your own. Right, now let's move on to the next one. Again, very important. I'm not going to explain this also because this is extremely important question. Please try to implement. Fetch data from API and display it with loading state. I think we have learned a lot of times how you can do that. So you can see that I already given this placeholder that implement loading state. So try to implement by your own this question. I'm pretty sure if you are giving some intermediate level of interview, you will get this question, like they will give you a API URL and then you need to implement this logic. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, this is a very interesting thing. Create a reusable button component with props. So what you need to do, right? Let's say you are creating very large application where you are having 100 buttons you need to use. Instead of creating the buttons multiple times, you create a functional component which will receive the props from parent component so that you will be able to reuse this component from 100 pages. So what we have done, right, we created a button. This will receive a text and on click, and we're passing this here, and then from wherever it is required from that component, I'm just importing this component. Now I'm explaining in very simple way. The reason is because I want you to implement all of this by your own, right? Place yourself in such a place that, okay, think that, okay, I'm giving a real interview, and then ask the question as an interviewer, implement a reusable button component with props, and then again think yourself as a candidate and try to write it. I hope you're getting what I'm trying to say. Okay, and believe me, this way it is you will be able to replicate your interview environment in your home only, so that it will be easy for you in your interview to implement all of this. Now next we have another one, that build a component that uses a use effect which will perform a cleanup. So I'll give you one example. So I created a timer component where I have a second state, and every second I'm basically using a set interval, right, and increasing the count by 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and then every time I'm cleaning up this interval here in the return, because use effect will return a callback, right? So this is what I want. So try to implement a timer component by your own, and also do something like this. You keep a button, whenever you click on this button you need to pause this timer, and again if you click it you need to resume it, something like that. So try to implement this also. Next, implement a context with a reducer for global state management. Very important. So use context plus use reducer, right? So what you need to do, right, till now we have learned this counter example multiple times. So try to implement this counter example using context and using use reducer, right? Try to do that. And let's see, go to the next one. All right, this is also another very important one, that build a component with conditional rendering based on props, right? So what we are doing right here, you can have multiple condition. Let's say you are having a condition 1. For condition 1 you need to render component 1. For condition 2 you need to render component 2. For condition 3 you need to render component 3, and you can have 10 condition. So how you are going to do that? So this condition, let's say you're receiving from props, so this is your condition, and you need to take a switch case. So for condition, let's say this is your condition 1, you need to render component 1. If this is condition 2, you need to render component 2. If this is condition 3, you need to render component 3. I hope you're getting. This question is also asking companies like Atlassian, like try to implement a component which will be based on switch statement. So you'll be receiving a props from your parent component, you will be having a switch statement, and based on the condition you need to render different component. So try to implement this. And then we are having at the end, implement a simple form component. So this is also very important, that create a simple form. There will be a button, on click of this you need to submit that form, and also try to implement the handling error functionality also, and this will be also very important. So I think these all the 100 questions that we covered in this particular video. I'm pretty sure that if you already have idea on React, Redux, those things, this video is going to help you immensely. I'm pretty sure. If you don't have, I'll highly suggest please learn React and Redux first, then you can use this video for your revision purposes. So that's all for this particular video. If you like this video, give a like, comment down, and please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in my next video. Till then, good luck and peace.